Chapter 1138. Tonight, the provincial governor's manor of Shang province was very lively. It was filled with guests and hosts. The provincial governor of Shang province was very fond of his only son. Almost every year, he would hold a grand wedding banquet for him. It was a pity that although the young master of the provincial governor had many wives and concubines, none of them could give birth to a son or daughter for the Ma clan. The people of Shang province discussed in secret. It was most likely that the Ma clan had done all sorts of evil deeds and the heavens were punishing them. They purposely caused the Ma clan to die without descendants to rid the world of the scourge. Of course, they were only discussing in secret. In Shang province, the Ma clan was the local tyrant. They had to pay the taxes and give the gifts that they had to give. Once they disobeyed, a great disaster would befall them. Provincial Governor's Manor. Congratulations, Lord Provincial Governor. I hope young Master Ma will have a son soon. Everyone, don't stand on ceremony today. Drink to your heart's content. The guests that had entered the manor cupped their hands and congratulated. After 3 rounds of drinking, the provincial governor of Shang province had finished dealing with the guests. He was a little tipsy and cupped his hands. Everyone, continue. I will go and rest first. He was supported back to his bedroom by the servants. When he closed the door and walked to the bedside, he discovered that there was already a person sitting at the table in the room. It was an old man with white hair. He looked a little sloppy and was currently sitting there, looking at him with an indifferent gaze. When he saw this unfamiliar old man, his body trembled and he immediately sobered up. He asked warily, "Who are you?" The sloppy old man reached his hand into his bosom and took out a dark red pill. He looked at him and said, "Eat this." He did not recognize this old man. A person that he did not recognize had appeared in his bedroom just like that. The provincial governor of Shang province did not hesitate to turn and run out the door. As he ran, he shouted, "Help, help, there's an assassin." Just as he shouted, he felt a sudden pain at the back of his neck. He could not help but open his mouth in pain. He felt something had entered his mouth and melted. That thing tasted extremely bitter. So bitter that tears almost flowed down his face. He squatted on the ground with tears and mucus flowing down his face. He stuck his finger into his throat as if he wanted to dig that thing out. However, he only retched a few times and did not vomit anything out. He looked at the old man in horror and asked, "You, what did you give me to eat?" The sloppy old man explained, "One-day life-taking powder." Not waiting for the provincial governor of Victory Province to ask again, he explained, "The Death Reaper in a day is concocted using honey, snow pear, white rabbit, and celestial mountain snow lotus. It is a top-notch poison in the world. As the name suggests, if you are poisoned by this poison and don't receive the antidote within a day, your 7 apertures will bleed, your intestines will rot, and you will eventually turn into a puddle of pus." Provincial governor of Shang province paled, but he forced himself to maintain his expression. Looking at him, he said, "How can there be such a strange poison in this world? Do you think this official has grown up scared?" The sloppy old man lightly tapped on his body, and the provincial governor of Shang province immediately knelt on the ground. The veins on his forehead bulged, and the blood vessels were like many earthworms wriggling on his forehead. He couldn't speak, and could only let out beast-like moans of pain from his throat. Not long after, a wet spot appeared on the ground beneath him. Some of it was sweat that seeped out from his body, some of it was urine. The sloppy old man tapped on his body with slight disdain, and only then did he stop wriggling. However, he would still twitch from time to time. "Do you believe me now?" The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "If you are a little more obedient, you will suffer less. You are already so old, yet you still don't understand this simple logic." Provincial governor of Shang province's complexion was completely pale. Using his last bit of strength, he asked, "You, who are you?" In a certain courtyard in the provincial governor's manor, the young master's drunkenness had already completely dissipated. His face was filled with terror. Looking at the shady old man opposite him, he asked with a trembling voice, "You, what did you do to me earlier?" Just now, this terrifying old man had only lightly tapped on his lower abdomen, and a certain part of him had immediately become as hard as iron. It was even more effective than those tiger and wolf medicines that he had eaten. But later on, he had tapped on the same place again, and then he had lost a great deal of energy, a piece of iron turning into cotton. Although he was usually very fast, he had never been this fast before. He faintly felt that something extremely terrifying had happened to his body. Changde did not explain anything to him. He casually knocked him out and tossed him to the side. Inside the room, Li Yi put down the red veil, looked at Lin Wanru, and asked in concern, "Are you all right?" Lin Wanru looked at him and said, "If you had come a little later, something would have happened." Li Yi was slightly astonished and asked, "How did you guys come to the provincial governor's manor? You didn't receive that letter?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked. Chapter 1139. Li Yi also felt that it was a bit wasteful. The guests had been invited, the banquet had been held, the wedding clothes had been worn, and the wedding house had been decorated. If nothing happened, it would be a waste of the wealth that the governor of Shang province had plundered from the people. It would be a shame to the people of Shang province, and a shame to the people of the world. But compared to when drunken Ink Ruoqing got married, it was still a bit shabby. He looked around and asked, "Isn't it too hasty?" Lin Wanru sat on the edge of the bed and looked away from him. She said, "This time I had thought that I would never see you again." Li Yi sighed softly. In this world, there were many things that were destined. If one really had to talk about it, the main culprit for them being trapped in Shang province was actually him. So all of this could be said to be his own doing. There was a relaxed smile on Lin Wanru's face. She said, "At that time I thought if I died like this, it would be such a pity. I haven't married yet, haven't waited for 2 years when no one wants me to marry you. Some things should not be delayed." She turned to look at Li Yi and said, "There is no time like the present. Instead of waiting for 2 years, it is better to do it now." She walked to the table and poured 2 cups of wine. She handed one to him and said, "Will you marry me?" Li Yi took the wine cup. Her wrist went around Li Yi's wrist, and the two drank the wine in the cup in one gulp. He looked at her and said apologetically, "I am sorry to have made you wait so long." In fact, regarding this matter, he had already confessed to Rui before he came. The debt of love that he had caused, he had to pay it back even if he had to kneel. Of course, the bite mark on his arm from Rui was still there. When they crossed cups of wine, the moment they raised their head, Li Yi seemed to see a familiar scene out of the corner of his eye. When he put down the wine cup, he realized that it was not an illusion. Mississippi Lu crossed her arms over her chest and leaned against the door, looking at him calmly. She looked at him, then looked at Lin Wanru, and asked, "Should I come a day later?" Outside the yard, Su looked at Changde and asked, "Does this count as being caught red-handed in bed?" Naturally, Chang would not be so bored as to answer his question. Su didn't expect him to answer. He shook his head and said, "Tazi, I'm still 1 step too late. I can't even be ranked 5th now." Li Yi did not expect Rui to arrive so timely. He did not know that after they left, she sent a letter to Liuzhou and that Mississippi Lu would travel day and night to come here personally because of that letter. Even if he didn't find the provincial governor's manor today, with Rui around, Wanru and the others would be fine. After all, she would always appear when she should and shouldn't appear. The provincial governor of Shangzhou was already under Su's control. After eating an overdose of white rabbit creamy herb, complemented by Su's unique secret technique, he was not afraid that he would not listen to him after tasting that kind of feeling that was worse than death. As for the son of the provincial governor who had committed all kinds of crimes, he had also paid a heavy price for offending the narrow-minded director Chang. From a certain point of view, he could no longer be called a son. Li Yi lay on the bed, his hands behind his head, a trace of fear still lingering in his heart. Fortunately, nothing went wrong in the end. It was just that Rui's appearance was a little too untimely. Otherwise, he would probably be able to talk to Wanru all night, talking about life and ideals. Before coming, he had actually thought of many ways, but he had not expected that the one who was seduced in the end would be himself. At home, Rui's martial arts were too high, and he couldn't beat her. As the empress, Ruoqing was in charge of hundreds of thousands of people. Drunk Amo always liked to be at the top, and only Ruoqing listened to him. Shopkeeper Lin was indeed the same shopkeeper Lin. If she was as domineering as before, her husband's authority might still be weak in the future. In another room, Mississippi Lu sat in front of the table, hugging autumn water, lost in thought. There was a knock on the door. She stood up and walked over to open the door. Lin Wanru came in with a quilt in her arms and said, "I've experienced many things in the past few days. I feel a little uneasy. I'll sleep with you tonight." Mississippi Lu didn't respond, but she didn't refuse either. With her personality, this was a tacit agreement. Lin Wanru walked to the bed, made the bed, and sat down next to her again. In fact, the two of them had a very good relationship, although neither of them liked to take the initiative to talk. Tonight, the one who broke the silence was Lin Wanru. She thought for a while, looked up at Mississippi Lu and said, "I'm sorry, I didn't tell you about this. Everyone can see what happened between you two." Mississippi Lu looked at her and said, "Before I came, Dwayner asked me if he could call Aunt Wanru mother when she comes back." Lin Wanru smiled and asked, "Did Dwayner ask when he could call Aunt Mother?" "No." Mississippi Lu put autumn water down and picked it up again. She said calmly, "Don't drag me into your matters. Rui." Lin Wanru looked at her and suddenly said, "How long are you going to wait?" Mississippi Lu held Autumn Water's hand tightly and said calmly, "I'm not waiting for anything. I've searched for her thousands of times, but when I look back, she's in the dim light." Lin Wanru had a faint smile on her face and said, "This is the best Upper Yuan poem I've ever heard." Mississippi Lu stood up and said, "I'm sleepy, I'm going to sleep." Lin Wanru watched her walk to the bedside, sighed softly, blew out the light, and walked over slowly. When she walked to the bedside, Mississippi Lu had already closed her eyes. She took off her clothes and lay down beside her. When her breathing began to stabilize, a pair of eyes slowly opened beside her. Xiaofan had cried for too long last night. When she woke up in the morning, although her face was full of smiles, her eyes were still swollen. Mississippi Lu woke up even later than Li Yi. She had two panda eyes and her complexion was worse than Xiaofan's. She probably didn't sleep well last night. Li Yi gave her 2 hard-boiled eggs. He wanted her to roll them in her eyes to get rid of the dark circles, but she actually peeled the eggs and ate them. Mississippi Lu only ate the egg whites. Li Yi ate the remaining egg yolks and cooked 2 more for her, specifically telling her that they weren't for eating. After saving Wanru, they should have immediately set off to go back. However, since they were already here, if they didn't kill some Taoist nuns along the way, Su and Elder Tian wouldn't be in a good mood. So this morning, Su Zhang brought people to occupy the branch of Holy Religion in Shang State. They simply moved to the branch of Holy Religion and waited for the Taoist nuns. Outside the capital, the 150,000 garrison soldiers of the capital had been in a stalemate with the 50,000 Imperial Army soldiers for more than 2 months. Although there was a huge disparity between the two sides in terms of military strength, it was still not enough to take down a country's capital with just this amount of military strength. If one wanted to use up the food supplies of the capital by surrounding it so that the city would collapse on its own, one would have to be prepared for a prolonged battle. There was enough food in the capital to last for several more months, but the 150,000 soldiers outside the city also needed food supplies. In the last 2 months, Zhao Zhang had scraped the ground, giving the provincial governors of 10 some provinces a strict order that they had to ensure a sufficient supply of food. In a tent, a purple-clothed man looked at Feng Yu and said, "Protector, for some reason, we lost contact with our branch in Shang State half a month ago. There's also been no news from the blue-clothed emissaries." Shang State. A hint of confusion appeared on Feng Yu's face. The entire capital region was now under their control. With a single order, he could command an army of 100,000 soldiers. Who would dare to make trouble for the Holy Religion in Shang State? It had been a very long time since a branch of the Holy Religion had become uncontactable. Although this routine was very familiar, he didn't believe that anyone would be so bold as to act so atrociously here. He glanced at the purple-clothed emissary and said, "Go see the branch in Shang State for yourself." Chapter 1140. Shangzhou. After the purple-clothed emissary left the tent, Feng Yu put the matter behind him for the time being. There were 8 purple-clothed emissaries in the Holy Religion, and each of them could be ranked on the so-called Heaven list of martial arts experts. A purple-clothed emissary and a few blue-clothed emissaries were enough to deal with all the problems in the branch in Shangzhou. He did not care about a mere branch in Shangzhou. What he cared about was the supreme position in the capital. Zhao Zhang trusted him very much because the Holy Religion was Zhao Zheng's last chance. Only by relying on the Holy Religion could he conquer the capital and become the new emperor of the Qi Kingdom. Thanks to Zhao Zheng's trust, he was able to gain control of the 150,000 soldiers in Beijing Hebei province in such a short period of time. Of course, in terms of numbers, the number of followers of the Holy Religion was more than this number, but the meaning of the two was different. He was the guardian of the right of the Holy Religion, second only to one, above tens of thousands, and leading more than 100,000 followers. But if he could become the emperor of a country, He would be above millions and tens of millions of people. This was the difference between heaven and earth. A figure walked into the tent. Feng Yu glanced at her, and his expression immediately became solemn. He bowed and said, "Your Highness." The Taoist nun walked inside and asked indifferently, "Did something happen in the branch in Xingzhou?" Feng Yu hurriedly nodded and said, "I've sent the purple-clothed emissary to investigate it personally." The middle-aged Taoist nun did not continue this topic. She turned to look at him and suddenly asked, "Do you want to replace Zhao Zheng?" Feng Yu's expression changed. He clenched his teeth and said, "Auntie, Zhao Zheng is a narrow-minded man. He doesn't keep his word. We can't trust him so easily. I'm afraid the first thing he will do after he ascends to the throne will be to get even with us. We can't place our hopes on him. As long as he sits in that position, I naturally have a way to make him listen to me." The Taoist nun looked at him and said, "You're not a legitimate member of the Zhao family. Even if you conquer the capital, the courtiers won't agree, and neither will the people of the Qi kingdom. If you want to sit on the throne, the whole world will oppose you. When that time comes, you won't even be able to take care of yourself. How can you avenge your family?" "Auntie." The Taoist nun looked at him and continued to ask, "Revenge for your family or your selfish desires, which is more important?" "Of course, revenge is more important." Feng Yu was silent for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "I know I was wrong." The middle-aged Taoist nun walked to the door, then turned around and said, "Xingzhou is already part of the capital region. The branch won't get into trouble easily. Keep an eye on this matter." Feng Yu bowed and said, "Yes." After the Taoist nun left, Feng Yu paced a few times in the tent and sat down again. Vengeance was important, but it was even more important to be an emperor who held great power and did whatever he wanted. The holy religion has 8 purple-robed emissaries, and each of them is in charge of a branch in several states. Now that we've taken down one, there are 7 left. Su Zhang sat opposite Li Yi and continued, "The position of the purple-robed emissaries in the holy religion is only below that of the empress and the protectors. Each of them is very important and indispensable. The disappearance of one of them will definitely attract great attention, and even the empress will come personally." What Li Yi wanted was the empress coming personally. If it weren't for the fact that they had limited energy and manpower, he would even want to destroy all the branches of the holy religion in the capital region. He didn't believe that the Taoist nun would still be able to sit still. Here, Elder Su had been waiting for her for so long that he couldn't wait any longer. After taking down the Taoist nun, Ruoqing would be the only empress, and the holy religion of the Lin family would be completely in his hands. At the same time, he could help Zhao Yi out of trouble and return the favor of taking care of the Lin family all these years. It was the best of both worlds. The goal was clear, the plan was smooth, and everything was perfect. The only thing that was not so perfect was that Mississippi Lu was sick. Except for that time in Fengzhou, when she was seriously injured, Li Yi had never seen Mississippi Lu sick in the past few years. She didn't even have the most common cold and fever. He had always thought that Rui was a superman, and that the illnesses of mortals had nothing to do with her. Only now did he realize that he was wrong, and very wrong. She didn't get up in the morning, and she didn't even get up when it was time for breakfast. She was never like this usually, so Li Yi thought that she was not in the room. When he walked in, he found that she was still lying on the bed. Li Yi pushed her through the quilt and said, "The sun is shining on your butt. It's such a hot day, and you're covered with such a thick quilt. Don't you feel hot?" Mississippi Lu didn't respond. Li Yi poked his head over and found that her face was very red. It was not the kind of blush that was shy, but a white blush. When he placed his palm on her forehead, his expression changed. She has been running around day and night these days, and her body is already tired. She also caught a little cold, and that's why she is like this. Not to mention her, even the body of a grandmaster has a limit. Elder Tian took his hand away from her wrist and said, "I'll write a prescription. After you get the medicine, boil it for a few days, and pay attention to rest. You'll be fine." Only then did Li Yi realize that Rui had set off a few days later than them, but she had arrived in Xingzhou almost at the same time as them. She probably didn't rest well in between. "I'll go get the medicine." In the past, Li Yi had bought and boiled medicine for Mississippi Lu countless times, so it was a walk in the park for him. He personally went to the pharmacy to buy the medicine, boiled it, and let it cool before bringing it to her bedside. Li Yi tested the temperature of the medicine, blew on it, and put the bowl down. He said, "There's no white rabbit creamy concoction, and Sue didn't bring it with him. Just make do with it this time. And I'll make another one for you later." Mississippi Lou was not afraid of anything, but she was afraid of bitterness. This was her only weakness that Li Yi had discovered. A piece of candy, and a mouthful of medicine. This was something that they had agreed on a long time ago. Mississippi Lou took a small sip, and her brows furrowed. She said, "There's no white rabbit creamy concoction, then, put some sugar in it." "No." Li Yi refused without any hesitation. He said, "Have you seen anyone put sugar in medicine? Will it still be effective? Then I won't drink it. I'll be fine after resting for a couple of days." Mississippi Lou also refused without hesitation. To her, drinking medicine was the most painful thing in the world. Li Yi looked at her and threatened, "Don't make me do it." Mississippi Lou also looked at him and said calmly, "You can try." Li Yi really did not dare to try. Even if Emingzu was standing in front of him, he would still dare to have a fair fight with Emingzu. However, if it was Mississippi Lou, he would not dare. After all, she only had a cold this time, and not a serious injury. Li Yi was worried that if they fought, he would be the one to eat the white rabbit creamy concoction in the end. "Then I'll ask Elder Tian if I can put sugar in it." He sighed. On the surface, Rui was a martial arts master with a cold temperament, but in reality, she was just a child who could not grow up. After hearing his words, Elder Tian looked at him in surprise and said, "It's not that you can't, but the effect of the medicine will be greatly reduced. It's just drinking medicine. Is there a need to go through so much trouble?" Li Yi shook his head. This kind of thing varied from person to person. He had to spoil her. After all, she was Rui. Just this once. When Li Yi walked into the room again, he placed the bowl of medicine in front of her. Mississippi Lou took a sip and frowned. She said, "It's still bitter. Add a little more." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Don't go too far. Any more and it'll be useless. Hold your breath and drink it in one go. That way you won't feel the bitterness." Mississippi Lou frowned. She held her breath and drank the entire bowl of black medicine. She put down the bowl and clutched her chest. She frowned and only calmed down after a while. She raised her head to look at Li Yi and asked, "Why does it taste as bitter as without sugar?" "Because I really didn't put sugar in it." Li Yi looked at her and said, "Didn't you drink it all without sugar?" Mississippi Lou looked at him and pointed at the long sword hanging on the wall. She said, "Help me get the autumn water." Li Yi did not understand. Rui is already so sick. Why would she need the autumn water? What she needs is a good rest. Fong did not understand either. The second young mistress had a serious cold. However, when he saw her chase after the son-in-law, it did not seem like it. Outside the capital in a tent, the middle-aged Taoist nun frowned. Did Envoy Chenzi not return? Fong Yu's expression was also a little unsightly. After Envoy Chenzi left, there was no more news. The blue-clothed envoys that were sent were also not heard from. Fong Yu looked at the purple-clothed people behind him and said, "The four of you go together. You must find out what happened in Shang province and where Envoy Chenzi is now." The middle-aged Taoist nun shook her head and said, "There's no need. This time, I'll go personally." Fong Yu thought for a while and said, "The four of you follow Her Highness. If something happens, you can take care of her." "Yes." The four of them bowed in unison. Chapter 1141. Rui didn't usually get sick. It was rare for her to get sick, but she didn't get better. She didn't have a fever anymore, but she kept coughing. It wasn't the season for pears to ripen, and they weren't in Jing Kingdom or Rui City. Li Yi spent a lot of effort to find a few and made a honey pear for her. Li Yi brought the honey pear in and said, "It's good for stopping coughs and reducing phlegm. Eat more. Don't forget to drink the rest of the soup. Don't waste it." It was better to be a patient. There were people to take care of everything. If it wasn't for the fact that he was sick, Li Yi would like to get sick like this. Mississippi Lou ate a few slices of the pear. There were still a few left. She lay back on the bed and looked at Li Yi. She said, "I can't eat any more. You can eat the rest. Don't waste it." "I'm not eating," Li Yi said firmly. Mississippi Lou looked at him. Don't misunderstand. I'm not looking down on you. Li Yi looked at her and explained, I'm just afraid that you'll infect me. Li Yi ate the few slices of pear in the end. Of course, it wasn't because he was worried that Rui would think that he was looking down on her and find a chance to take revenge in the future. He just didn't want to waste it. After all, it took a lot of effort to make this. Li Yi put down the bowl and looked at her. He asked, What do you want to eat today? I'll make it for you. Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and said, Steamed fish, sweet and sour pork ribs, emmingsu tofu, wolfberry yam. Li Yi counted with his fingers. There were 8 dishes and 1 soup. He looked at Mississippi Lu and asked, Are you a pig? Then make a bowl of noodles. Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, Add more vegetables. Li Yi waved his hand. 8 dishes and 1 soup. I haven't cooked for a long time. I'm afraid that I'm rusty. Let me try. He rolled up his sleeves and walked out. Soon, a sound came from outside the courtyard. Shower, is the fish we bought yesterday still alive? If it's dead, ask Lin Yong to buy another one. There's no more tofu. Don't forget to ask him to bring another piece when he comes back. And yam, buy the thin-skinned ones. Mississippi Lu leaned on the bed and coughed a few times. She bent her legs and wrapped her arms around her knees. She looked out of the door in a daze. In the courtyard, Su looked at Changde beside him and said, Old man Chang, why don't we make a bet on where Rui ranks? Changde habitually cherished his words like gold. Su thought for a moment and said, How about we make a bet? Between her and your princess, who will come first? Changde looked at him and said, Don't worry, if I see the Taoist nun, I will be lenient. Why are you saying this? Su glanced at him, then nodded and said, I don't need you to be lenient. She's mine. You don't have to interfere in this matter. Okay. Changde agreed without hesitation and turned to leave. Su was stunned. This old man usually liked to go against him. Why did he suddenly become so obedient this time? He was not used to it. He stood up and looked at Elder Tian, who was standing not far behind him, and said, Don't tell me this old man's personality has changed? Don't you think it's strange? Whether he's changed or not, we'll talk about it later. Elder Tian looked at him and said, Explain to me first, who is yours? Li Yi was processing the fish in the kitchen. He looked back and saw that the courtyard was in chaos. He deeply felt that to be able to marry a grandmaster like Rui, who was as understanding and gentle as water, was a blessing accumulated over several lifetimes. Whoever married someone with a bad temper like Elder Tian would be beaten up every day. Fortunately, there was no one with such a temper in his family. Rui was gentle with Wanru, and Ruoqing and Zuemo never fought over anything. Xiao Huan was even less so. Although Wanru was a little domineering, it mostly manifested in business. She had not been idle these days either. She was busy evacuating many shops outside the capital region, and there were countless orders being sent out every day. Only Rui was an anomaly. Li Yi swore to train hard. The days before she became a grandmaster were his last chance. Although Mississippi Lu's recovery was slower, it was getting better every day. This made Li Yi finally feel relieved. Cold was a very general concept here. Every year, there were countless people who lost their lives because of cold. Fortunately, Rui had a good physique and a good figure. She could turn any situation into a blessing. After taking medicine for a few days, she was basically fine except for some coughing. There was still no movement in Fengzhou City these days. After the few people sent by the holy religion did not return, they actually did not send anyone over. This made Li Yi extremely suspect that Taoist nun had given up on this place. However, there was nothing he could do about it. She did not come, and he could not force her to come. Moreover, Taoist nun was Su's concern. It was good that he was concerned about her. These days, Li Yi's attention was on Rui, and he had no time to care about her. Since Rui was sick, Li Yi noticed that she often began to daydream. She would maintain the same posture for a long time. A cold would not make a person daydream. Elder Tian said that she was tired and couldn't let go of the knot in her heart. Otherwise, she would not have suddenly fallen ill. A small cold took so long to deal with. What knot could Rui have? She never talked about it, and Li Yi never knew. Was it because she had seen too many grandmasters these days, and it stimulated her? Li Yi did not know. He brought a bowl of medicine into her room. This was the last bowl. He actually saw Mississippi Lou drinking, and there were a few side dishes on the table. He put the bowl of medicine on the table and said with a sullen face, "You haven't recovered yet. Who allowed you to drink?" "None of your business." Mississippi Lou originally wanted to say, "None of your business," but when she saw his face, she swallowed the words. She said, Elder Tian said. She said that my illness is no longer serious, and it's okay to drink some wine. Li Yi sat down opposite her and snatched her wine jar. He weighed it in his hand and found that half of the wine was gone. He glared at her angrily, raised his head, and drank the rest of the wine in the jar. This was a good wine from the provincial governor's mansion. After drinking so much at once, although she was not drunk, she was already a little dizzy. Considering her mood, he looked at her and said, "Forget it this time. Next time, at least wait until you recover." He threw the empty jar aside, and Mississippi Lou took out another jar from under the table. This was a provocation, a blatant provocation. Li Yi looked down and saw that there were no more jars under the table. Only then did he feel relieved and snatched the jar. He opened the seal and drank the small jar of wine again. He looked at Mississippi Lou and said, "Listen to me. When you recover, I will drink with you. Drinking now is not good for your health. It will be troublesome if your illness worsens." Mississippi Lou sat next to him and looked at him for a long time. Suddenly she asked, "Why are you so good to me?" Li Yi looked at her and asked in surprise, "Are you drunk?" Mississippi Lou nodded. Li Yi held onto the table and said, "You are Rui's younger sister. If I don't treat you well, who should I treat well?" Mississippi Lou looked at him and said, "Look into my eyes." Li Yi turned his gaze and looked into her eyes. "Say it again," Mississippi Lou said calmly. "Why are you so good to me?" "Because you are." Li Yi looked into the pair of deep eyes that contained countless emotions and opened his mouth. "Because you are." "Because I am your younger sister?" Li Yi looked into her eyes, but he could not say these words. "Because you are Rui." Li Yi looked at her and said, "The one and only Lu Rui in the world." Rui thought for a moment and asked, "Do you remember what you said that night?" "Which night?" "The night of your wedding." Others were Kong Rong's pair, but the three of them were sisters' pair. On the night of his wedding with Ruoqing Zumo, he was locked out by Rui and Ruoqing Zumo at the same time. That night, he and Rui drank and chatted happily. That was the closest he had ever been to Rui. Whether it was the distance or the spirit. Li Yi nodded and said, "I will support you." In fact, Li Yi rarely saw Rui smile. She would only sneer when she was beating him. When she really showed that kind of happy smile, Li Yi was disappointed to find that his heart seemed to have stopped beating. Clang! The wine jar in Li Yi's hand fell to the ground, not because Rui smiled, but because of the soft touch on his lips. It was not a touch, but a bump. Simple and violent. Fong walked in from outside and stood at the door. Seeing the situation in the room, he trembled and said, "Goo! Goo goo goo!" Mississippi Lou tilted her head to look at him and said lightly, "Get out." He quickly turned around and strode out of the room, closing the door on his way out. He stood in the yard and never felt that the sun was so hot today. He must be blind, very blind, so blind that he had hallucinations. Chapter 1142. Li Yi's mind went blank, but he thought of many things in an instant. Did he take too little time to brush his teeth in the morning? Did he eat something that he shouldn't have eaten in the morning? Did he taste the medicine for Rui just now? Was it hot or bitter? Was his mouth filled with a taste that she didn't like? And he drank wine just now. He really shouldn't have. He still didn't know where to put his hands. Would it be weird if he just let them hang like that? Should he put them on her waist? Shouldn't a man and a woman put their hands on her chest when kissing? But if he put them on her chest, would she beat him up? Regardless of whether Rui wanted to beat him up or not, he really wanted to beat Fong up now. It wasn't a vigorous French kiss, nor was it an extraordinary passionate kiss. He didn't even stick out his tongue. Lips touched, lips parted. That was all. "I like you." Rui looked at him with a very serious expression. "It started a long time ago." "But why is it you? Why does it have to be you?" Li Yi rarely saw Rui smile, but she would smile occasionally. He had never seen Rui cry, not even once. He didn't see her shed a tear, but after saying those two sentences, Her face was already covered with tears. I like you, why does it have to be you? These two sentences didn't seem to have any logic, but Rui understood, and so did Li Yi. No one understood the meaning of these two sentences better than them. He hugged her tightly. This was the first time that they were so close to each other. He looked at Rui and kissed her heavily, just like she had kissed him just now. The difference was that this time, he stuck out his tongue. In the yard, Fong looked at the sloppy old man and said, "You win." He looked extremely puzzled and asked, "How do you know it's second, miss?" The sloppy old man shrugged. "I guessed it." As soon as he said that, a loud sound rang in their ears. Somewhere in the room, a door burst open, and wood splinters flew everywhere. They could only see a white shadow disappear into the courtyard. Fong's expression changed, and he hurriedly ran over. Li Yi walked out of the room. He stood in the courtyard in a daze for a long time. It wasn't until Fong kicked his butt that he came back to his senses. Fong looked at him and said with some disappointment, "What are you waiting for? Go after him." After a gust of wind, Li Yi's figure disappeared from the courtyard. Fong turned around and saw the sloppy old man standing rooted to the ground. His face was filled with extreme shock, as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. He glanced at the sloppy old man and said lightly, "Haven't you already guessed it? Why are you pretending?" The sloppy old man put away his shocked expression and seemed to recall some past events. He let out a long sigh and muttered, "There's no justice in this world, there's no justice in this world." When Li Yi stood on the street, he could no longer see Mississippi Lu's figure. A peddler picked up the scattered goods on the ground, looked in a certain direction, and scolded angrily, "Why are you running so fast? Are you in a hurry to reincarnate?" Li Yi ran in that direction. The peddler who was carrying a pole looked at the crushed fruits on the ground with a painful expression on his face. He said angrily, "Damn it, why are you in such a hurry to reincarnate today?" Li Yi chased all the way out of the street and even out of the city gate. He chased for a long time, but he didn't see Rui. Finally, he couldn't run anymore. He stopped on the official road, held a big tree, and panted heavily. When Rui pushed him away and ran out, he felt that he was about to lose the most important thing. His heart seemed to be grasped by someone, and it kept clenching and clenching. At that moment, she was no longer the fearless leader of Wulin, nor was she the king of mountain bandits. She was just Lu Rui. From the first year of Jing He to the fourth year of Jing Ping, they had been walking for a whole 8 years. From Qing and prefecture to the capital to the Qi kingdom to the capital to Suzhou to the city of Rui to the Wu kingdom and now to the Qi kingdom. Only they knew how much they had experienced. They couldn't be separated for a long time, and they wouldn't be separated. "Rui, Rui." Li Yi leaned against a tree by the side of the road and laughed like a fool. "What are you laughing at?" A voice came from above him. Li Yi raised his head slightly and said, "Come down first." "I can't." Li Yi raised his head even higher and said, "Do you know why girls can't climb trees when they're wearing skirts?" Just as he finished speaking, a figure appeared beside him. Li Yi leaned against the tree and said, "I like to hear you say you like me. Do you want to say it again? Why can't you say it? I like you." Li Yi looked at her and said, "I like you very much." "I don't like you." "It's useless to say it now." Li Yi laughed happily. Holding his stomach, he said, "I didn't think our Rui would cry. To tell the truth, you look pretty good when you cry. Say it again. When did you start to like me? Didn't I say it earlier? Say it again." "Okay." Li Yi held back his laughter and was about to speak when a voice came from the front. "Your Highness Jiang of Silla, what are you so happy about?" The voice was both familiar and strange. Li Yi looked at the Taoist nun walking toward him and casually raised his hands in a salute. "Taoist Fong, long time no see." The Taoist nun held a horsetail whisk and nodded. "Yes, long time no see. How is the other empress of our holy religion?" Li Yi smiled and said, "Of course she's very good." The Taoist nun looked at him and said, "I wonder if your Highness Jiang of Silla has the time to come with me again?" Mississippi Lu was waiting for him to confess again. Hearing this, she frowned and looked at her. "Get lost." The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at her and put down the horsetail whisk in her hand. Mississippi Lu looked at Li Yi and said, "Wait a moment." As soon as she finished speaking, her figure had already disappeared. At the same time, An extremely sharp sword light appeared in the middle-aged Taoist nun's eyes. One sword. She only used one sword move. The sword light rippled like water and filled the entire space. After a moment, Mississippi Lu came back with autumn water in her arms. Okay, you can continue now. Li Yi sighed and looked at her. Will I never be able to catch up to you? Are you going to tell me or not? If not, I'm leaving. Probably the first time we met, from the moment you looked at me on the horse, waved your hand and said, "Tie me up." Mississippi Lu leaned against the tree and hugged Autumn Water. She said with interest, "Continue, don't stop. Do you remember that time when I bet with you which of the two rocks would fall to the ground first? You said it would be the bigger one. At that time I thought, such a silly girl must be very easy to fool. At that time, I didn't know that you weren't silly at all. It took so many years to fool you." Outside of Victory State City, in a simple courtyard in a village, the middle-aged Taoist nun spat out blood again and staggered to open the courtyard door. Seeing this, the two people in purple were shocked. They immediately walked forward and said in panic, Lady, what's wrong? Stand guard here. No one is allowed to come in." The middle-aged Taoist nun walked into a room and stopped the two people in purple from helping her up. Inside the room, the other two people in purple also quickly walked over. The four of them looked at each other. In the next moment, 4 sword lights appeared in the small room. Chapter 1143. Li Yi felt that the heavens were too unfair. They were both only a step away from becoming a grandmaster. Why was it that when he kissed Rui broke through, but he did not improve at all? Moreover, her breakthrough was the kind of breakthrough that could shock people to death. She had only become a grandmaster for 2 hours, but she could already beat the Taoist nun who had been stuck in the grandmaster realm for decades. Although this kiss was blissful and beautiful, so beautiful that it bubbled, but it also made one of the beautiful wishes in his heart, the wish that one day he could be the master of the world, completely become a bubble. He looked at Rui gloomily and said, "Why don't you try kissing me again? Maybe I can break through too." Mississippi Lu rolled her eyes at him and turned to walk forward. Li Yi hurriedly chased after her. "Why don't I kiss you too?" Outside Xingzhou City, in a small courtyard in a deserted village. Inside the room, the smell of blood assailed the nostrils. Taoist nun held a horsetail whisk in her hand and slowly sat down. The room was covered in blood, and the 4 men in purple lying on the ground were moaning in pain. When did it start? She covered her mouth and coughed a few times, wiping the blood from the corner of her mouth. Her voice was emotionless. One of the men in purple was lying at her feet. His throat made a sound like a broken bellow, and he kept coughing out blood. He coughed for a long time before he said, This subordinate has been following Her Highness since 20 years ago. Today's ending is all of it is my own fault." After saying this, he seemed to have used up all his strength. His chest was heaving up and down. After a long pause he continued, "I don't beg you to spare my life. I only hope that you can give me a quick death so that I won't be wasting my time following you all these years." The middle-aged Taoist nun looked at him and said softly, "The guardian asked you to do this." None of the 4 men in purple said anything. "Come out." The Taoist nun coughed again and said, "Come out and tell me, why did you do this?" Creak. The back door of the room was pushed open, and a figure came in from behind. "Auntie." Feng Yu stood in the room and looked at her. He sighed and said, "Don't blame me." The middle-aged Taoist nun put the horsetail whisk on the table and looked at him, saying, "Give me a reason." "What reason do I need?" Feng Yu shook his head and said, "Only when Auntie dies and the holy religion is in my hands can I do what I want to do." "What's the point of being a protector? What's the point of being a queen? What's the point of being an emperor? Do you understand? I want to be the emperor. But you won't let me." Feng Yu looked at him with a slightly ferocious expression and said, "The holy religion is the holy religion of our Feng family." Su's expression was extremely gloomy. It was as if the goods he had guarded for many years had been stolen at the most critical moment. More importantly, he could neither blame nor seek revenge on the person who had stolen his goods. Feng Yu's face turned pale. He instinctively wanted to turn and run. Su waved his hand and a white rabbit creamy candy struck his neck. Feng Yu fell to the ground. "Forget it. Since you don't want revenge, then let's not do it." The middle-aged Taoist nun mumbled, "After all, only you can represent the Feng family." After saying this, Her entire body seemed to relax. A smile that Li Yi had never seen appeared on her face. She looked at Mississippi Lu and said, 20 years ago, I lost to Lu Qing in one move. 20 years later, I lost to you in one move. Your Lu family, cough cough. Before she could finish, she vomited another mouthful of blood. The front of her Taoist robe was completely dyed red. This is for you. Spare his life. She looked at Feng Yu and took out a token made of unknown material from her waist. She handed it to Li Yi. Li Yi knew what it was. He reached out and took it. He nodded and said, okay. She looked at Mississippi Lu and said weakly, There's something I need your help with. She handed the horsetail whisk to Rui and said, This horsetail whisk was given to me by him years ago. If there's a chance in the future, please help me stick it in front of his grave. Tell him that Feng Jingyu doesn't owe him anything anymore. Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and took the horsetail whisk. She nodded and said, I promise you. Thank you. Taoist Nun's expression was no longer as calm as usual. She smiled and quietly leaned against the chair. There was no more sound. Su let out a long sigh and murmured, It's not enough to kill her. Why did she have to do this? Li Yi could see that before today, this Taoist nun seemed to be carrying something extremely heavy on her back. Even though she was a grandmaster with top-notch martial arts skills, it was still difficult for her to breathe under the weight of the burden. At that moment, the weight on her body seemed to have completely disappeared. This Taoist nun had kidnapped him and saved him before. Li Yi hated her, but not to the extent that he hated her to the bone. He suddenly felt a sense of sorrow in his heart. He did not know if it was because of the passing of a grandmaster, or because an old friend he had known for a long time had passed away right before his eyes. Mississippi Lu's eyes were also a little red. Li Yi held her waist and let her head rest on his shoulder. He patted her back to comfort her. Then, he felt a hard pinch on his waist. There was one less grandmaster in this world. There was a new grave outside Shenzhou City. The coffin was personally made by Su using an old tree in the courtyard. The grave was dug by Chong. He took a shovel and dug for 2 hours without saying a word. Elder Tian helped her wipe the blood from the corner of her mouth and changed her into a clean set of clothes. Mississippi Lu carved a tombstone for her. The words on the tombstone were personally carved by Li Yi. This was probably a kind of mutual appreciation between grandmasters. It had nothing to do with friend or foe. At some point, Li Yi felt that he should not have joined in the fun. After all, he was not even a grandmaster. Unknowingly, he had lowered the status of the four of them. There was only a simple line of words on the tombstone. Tomb of Feng Jingyu. This was a very ordinary grave, so ordinary that it couldn't be any more ordinary. There was no way that anyone would know that a martial arts grandmaster was buried here, as well as the heavenly empress who had hundreds of thousands of followers. Chapter 1144. The Taoist nun, who had many grudges with them, died. She had a smile on her face when she committed suicide. They had no way of knowing what kind of love and hatred this Taoist nun had with Li Yi's father-in-law, who had passed away a long time ago. However, that was no longer important. The grudge between the Feng family and the royal family of the Jing kingdom had turned into dust with her death. She could no longer see the future of the holy religion that she had built and developed with her own hands. Everything about her life was buried in this small grave. Li Yi held 3 tokens in his hands. One was given to him by the Taoist nun before she died. It represented the supreme position in the holy religion. The other 2 represented the left and right protectors of the holy religion. He already had one, which was the token of the right protector on Feng Yu's body. Holding these 3 tokens in his hands, he held the entire holy religion in his hands. He had promised the Taoist nun that he would spare Feng Yu's life. He would only ask Su to abolish his martial arts. Feng Yu would live an ordinary life from now on, but he would not lack food and clothing. He would live an ordinary life, just as the Taoist nun had hoped. When Li Yi and Rui walked back, Feng, who had been looking at the courtyard gate, immediately turned his head. Actually, there was nothing for him to hide. Although he was blind, it wasn't the first or second day that he was blind. Rui wouldn't kill him just because of this reason. To Li Yi's regret, Rui was still not willing to talk to him after he had confessed and kissed her. After they came back, she locked herself in her room. No matter how many times Li Yi knocked on the door, she would not open it. In fact, he still had a lot to say to her, but he also knew how difficult it was for Rui to say those words and take that step. He stepped back and saw Wanru standing in the yard, smiling at him. She looked at Li Yi and asked, "Is she all right?" Li Yi sat down beside her and shook his head slightly. "Don't worry." Wanru looked at him and said, "There are some things that will be fine as long as she thinks it through." Li Yi looked at her. She reached out to hold his hand and said, "Actually, when we were in Fengzhou, I always thought that you were lovers who eloped. When you told me the truth, I thought you were lying to me. But I can see through your eyes. Your eyes can't lie." Li Yi sighed and looked at Rui's tightly shut door, feeling a little worried. She patted Li Yi's hand and said, "You have to believe that you've been together for so many years. No matter what difficulties you encounter, you'll be able to overcome them." Su stood in the distance and sighed. He said, "What's so good about this kid? Why does he meet all the good women in the world? Are you envious?" A voice rang in his ear. "No." Su turned to look at her and said, "You're enough for me." Why should I be envious of him? Although Rui had taken that step, there was still a knot in her heart that was difficult to let go. Li Yi did not want to disturb her, so he took out the 3 tokens again. Before he left, there were still some things that needed to be arranged. King Feng's residence in the capital. A general half knelt in front of Zhao Yi and said, "Your Highness, the Crown Prince's 150,000 soldiers consume a lot of food every day. I'm afraid that the capital region has already been swept clean by them. When they run out of food, I'm afraid that they'll attack the city with all their might. Send another 20% of the soldiers to guard the west gate. Send people out of the city to find out where the reinforcements are. Have people increase the number of patrols at the city gates and reduce the time it takes to change guards by half." Zhao Yi gave a few more orders before he had the time to sit down and drink a cup of tea to moisten his throat. In the last few days, they had not only had to deal with the assault of the 150,000 soldiers outside the city, but also the various undercurrents within the capital. In addition, they also had to deal with Zhao Zheng and the spies of the Holy Church in the capital. If they let down their guard, the spies might even open the city gates and welcome the soldiers into the capital. If they were not careful, one wrong step would lead them into a bottomless abyss. And their reinforcements had encountered countless obstacles on the way and had yet to arrive. Zhao Xiaofan's delicate face was now covered in a scraggly beard. He walked up to Zhao Yi and slowly said, "I'm afraid that there will be a fierce battle in the next few days." Yang Yanzhou cleared his throat and said, "At present, the entire capital is a soldier, and countless people have volunteered to join the army. The imperial army has always been stronger than the soldiers of the capital. Even if there is a true battle, we might not necessarily lose." After a few moments of silence, Zhao Yi slowly said, "If that's the case, then we can only fight to the death." In the camp outside the capital, Zhao Jing paced back and forth in his tent, an impatient look on his face. He looked at the person behind him and asked, "Where did your protector Feng go? Why hasn't he returned yet?" The person calmly shook his head and said, "The protector's whereabouts are uncertain. We don't know. I don't care where he went. We must attack the city tomorrow." Zhao Zhang waved his hand and said, "If we continue to waste time like this, it will do us more harm than good. Zhao Yi and the others are already an arrow at the end of its flight. With a spurt of energy, they will definitely be able to take the capital." The person's expression remained calm as he indifferently said, "Without the orders of Her Majesty and the Protector, we will not act rashly." Zhao Zhang angrily said, "I am the Crown Prince. I want to order the soldiers of the capital. You dare to disobey I?" The person indifferently glanced at him but did not say anything else. Zhao Zheng's chest heaved a few times, but his emotions actually calmed down. He strode out of the tent and came to another tent. After sitting down in the tent, his expression was so gloomy that it was about to drip water. If he still did not realize that something was wrong by now, he would be a complete idiot. Feng Yu had unknowingly made him a mere figurehead. Those who controlled the military were mostly people of the holy religion. They listened to Feng Yu's orders more than him. Suddenly, footsteps were heard outside the tent. Someone came in and looked at Zhao Zheng. He waved his hand and said, "Take him down." Several men in blue walked toward him. "What do you want?" Zhao Zheng's expression changed. "What are you doing?" Zhao Zhang wanted to resist, but he could not fight against the 2 men in blue. With a fierce expression he shouted, "Where is Feng Yu? Get Feng Yu to come out and see me. Feng Yu can't come to see you. Su Zhang looked at him and waved his hand. Take him away. More than half of the high-ranking generals of the 150,000 soldiers had been infiltrated by Feng Yu and Taoist Nun. No wonder Feng Yu was so obsessed with the throne of the Qi kingdom. He was only one step away from that position. If not for Zhao Yi's stubborn defense of the capital, the current Qi kingdom would have changed. Several generals who were still loyal to Zhao Zhang were taken down immediately. The rest of the generals were elites of the holy religion. After seeing the 3 tokens, they immediately surrendered. Of the 8 purple-robed emissaries of the holy religion, 4 were dead and 1 was imprisoned in Victory Province. When they subdued the other 3, they did not encounter much resistance. Changde walked to Li Yi's side and suddenly asked, "What do you plan to do about the Qi kingdom?" Li Yi understood what Chang meant. The 150,000 soldiers in the capital region were all under their control. Taking down the capital would be a piece of cake. What Zhao Zheng and Feng Yu could not do, they could easily do. Of course, taking down the capital did not mean that they would be able to take over the Qi kingdom. After all, they were not the imperial family of Zhao. The Qi kingdom would not be in chaos like the Wu kingdom. After taking over the capital, the Qi kingdom would definitely be in chaos. What they would have to face next might be countless rebels. Li Yi did not want the Qi kingdom. He had no interest in being the emperor in the open or in the dark. In his heart, these things were not as important as seeing Rui smile again. Li Yi thought about it and said, "Let's return the favor." Chang nodded and said no more. The capital. The sky had just brightened when a general rushed into King Feng's residence. Before he saw Zhao Yi, he shouted, Your Highness, they've retreated." Chapter 1145. In the past few decades, the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom had been in constant conflict. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were mortal enemies. To be exact, the Jing kingdom had always been suppressed by the Qi kingdom. This situation had been reversed in recent years. After dozens of wars, big and small, the Qi kingdom had been taught a lesson by the Jing kingdom. The hatred between the two countries was rooted in the hearts of every citizen. Now, the Jing kingdom was faced with an opportunity. Li Yi only needed to think about it, and he could completely determine the future of the Qi kingdom and the Jing kingdom. He could even make the Qi kingdom disappear from the history books. However, he did not make this choice in the end. Lin Yong and Xiao Er were packing their belongings. They were about to leave and return to Rui City. Li Yi sat in the courtyard. A figure came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his neck. She whispered in his ear, "Thank you." Li Yi held her hands from the front and said, "What are you thanking me for? Zhao Yi has helped the Lin family for so long. Consider this a favor to him." "Brother Li, this favor is too great. It's so great that Zhao Yi can't bear it." A voice came from outside. "Miss Lin." Zhao Yi walked in and bowed to Lin Wanru first. His salute was extremely respectful and proper. There was nothing to nitpick about. However, it was precisely because of this that his action was even more rude. He was the third prince of the Qi kingdom. Now he was the emperor of the Qi kingdom. It was impolite for the emperor to bow to his subjects and people. The expressions of the people beside him changed when they saw this. Only the god of fortune Qian and a white-browed monk remained calm. They knew what the third prince was bowing to, and they also knew that the lady in front of him was worthy of it. Because if it wasn't for her, the third prince wouldn't even have the chance to stand here and bow. "Greetings, third prince." Lin Wanru bowed slightly to Zhao Yi, then looked at Li Yi, turned around and walked back to her room. Li Yi gestured for him to sit down and said, "Thank you for taking care of Wanru all these years." Zhao Yi couldn't help but smile and said, "I only told him a few words and did a few things in passing. Brother Li's gift is a bit too much. I'm afraid Zhao Yi won't be able to repay this favor for the rest of my life." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I'm just doing it out of convenience. You help me take care of Wanru, and I'll give you Zhao Zheng. We're even. Don't talk about owing me or repaying me." Behind Zhao Yi, someone's face twitched. Breaking the siege of the Crown Prince's 150,000 soldiers, solving the third prince's biggest crisis, and giving the capital to him, was this also called doing it out of convenience? Just what sort of person could make the third prince cast aside the chaos in the capital and rush over to meet with him? Zhao Yi looked at him and asked, "Brother Li, you're leaving?" Li Yi nodded and said, I'm leaving today. Zhao Yi sighed and said with a tone full of regret, "It's a pity that Brother Li's ambition isn't here. Otherwise, you and I can join hands and accomplish a great undertaking." Zhao Yi's words were a bit strange. He was the third prince of the Qi kingdom and would soon be the emperor of the Qi kingdom. What great undertaking did he need the two of them to accomplish? Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What great undertaking?" Zhao Yi thought for a moment and looked at him, saying, "The Lord of the World." The Lord of the World was exactly what it meant. Zhao Yi didn't want to be the emperor of the Qi kingdom, or rather, he didn't just want to be the emperor of the Qi kingdom. He also wanted to be the emperor of the Jing kingdom, the Wu kingdom, and the Zhao kingdom. He wanted to be the master of the entire world. Li Yi looked at him and suddenly asked, "Did I do something stupid?" Zhao Yi nodded and said, "You can say that." Li Yi thought for a moment and took out his autumn water and placed it on Zhao Yi's neck, asking, "Is it too late for me to regret it now?" "How dare you? Stop. Let go of His Highness." The faces of the few people standing behind Zhao Yi changed at the same time as they spoke in a stern voice. Zhao Yi's expression didn't change. He looked at Li Yi and smiled, saying, "The Lord of the World is so difficult that I don't even have half a chance of succeeding. But I know that Brother Li does." His expression didn't change and his eyes were indifferent. He said, "I just hope that one day I can see the Lord of the World. It doesn't matter who becomes the emperor. If Brother Li succeeds, you must remember to come to Zhao Yi's grave and tell me, so that we didn't get to know each other in vain." An official behind him said anxiously, "Your Highness." Li Yi looked at Zhao Yi. There was no fear on his face. When he talked about death, it was like he was talking about something normal. Li Yi shook his head and put away his autumn water. He said, "Forget it. She just cleaned this sword. If I dirty it, she'll beat me up. It's not worth it." There were always some strange people in this world. Some people liked to court death and would feel uncomfortable if they didn't court death for a day. Some people liked to help princesses become empresses. And some people liked to collect grandmasters. They wanted to collect all the grandmasters in the world. Lullicon, older sister complex, princess complex, queen complex, empress complex, grandmaster complex. Even these people with special hobbies existed. In comparison, Zhao Yi's dream of being the ruler of the world was nothing. Li Yi thought about it and looked at him. He suggested, "Why don't you go fight the Jing kingdom first? The Jing kingdom is close and convenient." "I can't beat them," Zhao Yi said honestly. Li Yi shook his head and said with disappointment, "You still want to be the lord of the world. You retreat at such a small setback. If you're a man, you have to face difficulties." Zhao Yi said helplessly, "I really can't beat them." Li Yi thought about it and said, "Then consider the Wu kingdom. The Wu kingdom is in chaos. It's easy to fight them." Zhao Yi looked at him and asked, "The Wu kingdom's divine punishment and the red barbarian cannon have nothing to do with Brother Li?" Li Yi shook his head. "No." Zhao Yi's attitude was very firm. "I won't fight them." The little bit of admiration that Li Yi had for Zhao Yi just now immediately disappeared. He had thought that Li Yi was really a hero with great talent and bold vision. It turned out that he was just a big liar who only knew how to talk. How could he allow others to sleep beside him? Which ruler of the world could tolerate two countries that were stronger than them by his side? Just a moment ago, he was saying that he was the lord of the world, and the next moment, he became a complete coward. Li Yi really admired this kind of shamelessness. "For you, don't want to be the lord of the world. A toast to you." Li Yi poured 2 cups of wine, raised 1 cup, and gestured to him. Zhao Yi also raised his cup. "This cup is a farewell for Brother Li." The two raised their heads together and drank the wine in their cups. "Let's go." Li Yi lifted the curtain of the carriage and casually waved at Zhao Yi. Zhao Yi stood at the gate of the city and watched the carriages go away. Until the carriages completely disappeared in the distance, he sighed, and a deep disappointment appeared on his face. Money God of Fortune pondered for a moment and said, "He and your highness are not on the same side after all." Zhao Yi nodded. When he raised his head, the disappointment on his face had disappeared. He said, "I only hope that the next time we meet, we don't have to fight with swords." A person beside him couldn't help but look at Zhao Yi and ask, "Your Highness, since this person is so useful to us, why don't we keep him?" "Keep him?" A middle-aged man who had been standing behind Zhao Yi said, Why should he keep him? Because of those 100 elites? If he has evil intentions towards your highness, even if we increase the defense by 10 times, it will be useless. He looked into the distance, and the fear on his face hadn't disappeared. He murmured, "Are all the grandmasters in the world from their family?" Your highness." The provincial governor of Shangzhou trembled as he walked to the third prince. He couldn't speak properly. Zhao Yi glanced at him and thought of the last thing that Li Yi had asked of him before he left. He pointed at a new grave not far away and said, "Have people repair the area within a radius of 100 zhong of that grave. Don't destroy a single blade of grass or tree within 3 zhong. After doing this, come to the capital to receive your punishment." The provincial governor of Shangzhou knelt on the ground and said loudly, "Thank you, your highness, thank you, your highness." Chapter 1146. Li Yi didn't know what kind of path Zhao Yi would take in the future, but for now, he could be called a great ruler. However, since ancient times, there were so many people who wanted to rule the world, but how many of them did it in the end? The Jing kingdom couldn't win, and the Wu kingdom didn't dare to fight. He unified the world with words. He could continue to dream of unification, but Li Yi just wanted to hold Rui and Wanru in his arms. Unfortunately, they wouldn't let him hold either of them. Along the way, Rui avoided him. She and Wanru were in the same carriage, so he couldn't see either of them. What kind of person was she? After confessing, she acted as if nothing had happened and didn't need to take responsibility. Bored, Li Yi took out 3 tokens and played with them in his hand. The token looked like jade, and he didn't know what material it was made of. There was an azure dragon, a white tiger, and a blurry portrait of a woman, which represented the empress. The real leaders of the holy religion were the 2 goddesses and the 2 protectors. Ruoqing didn't need any token to prove her identity, because her face was the proof of her identity. Therefore, the saint only had 3 tokens. Gathering all 3 of them together, even though they couldn't summon the dragon god, they had full control over the saint. This was Li Yi's goal a long time ago. However, now that he had achieved it, he didn't seem to be as happy as he imagined. Li Yi kept the 3 tokens and would give them to Ruoqing when he returned. Li Yi also asked Su Zheng to remove all the spies planted by the holy religion in the Qi kingdom, including the generals who actually held power in Jiangyi, back to Rui City. These tricks were useless in front of Zhao Yi. Since Li Yi had withdrawn the soldiers besieging the capital and stabilized his position on the throne, he disdained playing around with these things. As for his lofty dream of unifying the world, let's wait and see for now. This trip will pass by Fengzhou, so Wanru has some time to make arrangements for the Lin family. The Lin family's jewelry business and other businesses had been separated by her a long time ago. She had handed over the Lin family's assets to the Lin family to manage. As for the cloth, clothes, liquor, and perfume, they were the dowry she had prepared for herself. A person's energy was limited. No matter how much money he had, it was useless. After discussing with her, Li Yi decided to gradually withdraw from the market of the Qi kingdom. If the merchants of the Qi kingdom wanted to buy these goods, Rui City was a good place to do so. When she entered the house, Ruoqing did not have to be so busy. They walked and played along the way. Zhao Yi had already cleaned up all the provinces and mansions of the Qi kingdom. After the turmoil this time, the Qi kingdom's vitality was greatly damaged. It would probably take a long time to recuperate. Zhao Yi had just ascended the throne, so it would also take a long time to stabilize the situation in the court. They stayed in Fengzhou for about 5 days. After thoroughly making arrangements for the Lin family, they set off again. Rui City. Rui, Ruoqing, and Zumo had already returned. They were not surprised that Wanru came back with them this time. Li Duan walked around the room. With his hands clasped behind his back, he walked up to Wanru. He opened his mouth and immediately closed it. Wanru looked at him and asked in confusion, "Duaner, what's wrong?" Li Duan asked in confusion, "Should I call her aunt or mother?" Wanru's face turned red. Rui walked to his side and said, "You'll have to call her mother in the future." Li Duan nodded, not really understanding what she meant. "Mother." He looked up at Wanru and called out with a smile. Indeed, there was no difference between aunt and mother. Wanru's aunt became mother when she came back with his father. Little aunt should also become mother when she came back with his father, right? She would not spank him in the future, would she?
Then he ran to Mississippi Lu's side and said happily, "Mother."
The room suddenly became a little quiet. Wanru looked at Li Yi and quickly looked away. Ruoqing and Zumo looked over in confusion. Xiao Huan was stunned, and then a happy expression appeared on her face. Rui looked at Li Duan, shook her head and said, "Duaner, have you even forgotten your aunt?" A trace of panic appeared on Mississippi Lu's face, but she quickly calmed down. She picked up Li Duan and said, "I'll go out and talk to Duaner. He will remember soon." Li Duan was spanked and ran away with his hands covering his butt. He no longer dared to call Rui mother.
When only he and Rui were left in the room, Rui picked up the horsetail whisk and said, "I just thought of something when I heard you say it."
When father was still alive, he mentioned it a few times.
At that time, Rui was still young and may not remember.
Rui sat on the bed and said, "Father said that when he was young, he went out to wander in Zhonghu and once met a woman. He said that the woman was carrying something very heavy on her back.
They were not the same people, and then it was left unsettled."
Rui carefully put down the horsetail whisk and said, "I was not old at that time and didn't understand what father said. I didn't expect that the Taoist priest was the woman that father met back then." Rui didn't know much, and Li Yi only heard a few words, not of vigorous love and hatred. Li Yi held her hand and said, "The dead are gone. Let the past be the past." Rui nodded.
Li Yi looked out of the window for a long time and then looked back at Rui with a serious expression.
He held her hand and said, "When we were in victory state, something happened." He decided to tell Rui about it as soon as possible. He couldn't leave this problem to Rui. Rui looked at him and asked, "You want to talk about Rui, right?" At this moment, the feeling in Li Yi's heart was hard to describe with words. He looked at Rui, and there seemed to be thousands of thoughts in his heart. He thought for a long time, opened his mouth, but still didn't say anything. Rui smiled and said, "Becoming a supreme power is Rui's wish since she was young. I'm happy for her." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not talking about Rui's breakthrough." Rui looked at him and shook her head slightly.
She said, "Let me finish first, husband."
Li Yi nodded. "Rui is 2 years younger than me. We grew up together. My father and mother passed away early, so I had to take care of her since she was young. I gave in to her in everything and didn't want her to suffer any grievances. But actually all along, it wasn't me who gave in to her." Rui tightened her grip on his hand and said, "Rui has been stubborn since she was young. Sometimes, she doesn't even listen to her father, but she has always listened to me. I don't need to give in to her at all, because she won't fight with me for anything." At that time, father came back to buy pastries. She clearly liked them, but she always pretended that she didn't like them and left the last piece for me. Her favorite autumn water was actually left for me by father. I knew she liked it, so I didn't dare to show even a little bit of liking. Because as long as I liked it, she definitely wouldn't want it.
Rui held his hand even more tightly and said, "Actually all along, it was she who gave way to me."
Li Yi's hand hurt a little. This was a sign that Rui had lost control of her emotions.
This was the first time she had said these words to him, and it was also the first time she had lost control of her emotions.
"Actually, she's more like a sister than I am." 2 streams of tears rolled down Rui's face. She leaned against Li Yi's chest and continued, "She gave everything she liked to me. She gave the Grandmaster title to me. She gave the husband to me. She could have broken through to the Grandmaster stage earlier.
She could have met the husband earlier. We promised when we were young that we would marry the same person in the future."
When Rui said this, Li Yi's chest was already wet. She sobbed, "I'm the selfish one. I'm the one who didn't keep my promise. I'm the one who didn't keep my promise." Rui was already sobbing in his arms. Li Yi reached out and hugged her tightly. In a room across the courtyard, Mississippi Lu sat in front of the table. Although she didn't say anything, tears were already streaming down her face. Chapter 1147. Marrying the same husband was just a promise made by Rui and Rui when they were young. It didn't count. Li Yi of course wouldn't use this reason to convince Rui. They both wanted to give their best things to each other. Li Yi wasn't a good thing and he didn't want them to give him away. Being able to marry Rui was already the luckiest thing in his life. At the same time, he also got to know Rui. The heavens had treated him badly in his previous life, but he had made up for it in this life. The heavens had treated him well, so he had to cherish it. Rui leaned on his chest. It didn't take long for him to hear her breathing. In these years, no matter how big the difficulties and obstacles were, she could calmly deal with them. Most of the time, she was even calmer than Li Yi himself. It wasn't until that moment that Li Yi realized that he had never truly understood Rui. He gently placed her on the bed and covered her with a blanket. She had just gone through a series of emotional ups and downs. She needed a good rest. Li Yi walked out of the room and came to the courtyard. He thought for a moment, then walked out of the door and into another courtyard. He walked to the door of a room in the courtyard and knocked on the door. No one answered. The door was unlatched. He pushed the door open and found that Mississippi Lu wasn't in the room. There was a piece of paper on the table with a line of words written on it. "I'm going out for a walk. No need to look for me." Her words were very elegant. She didn't stick to any kind of script. Just like her, free and easy. Rui left. She didn't say where she was going or when she would be back. Of course, Li Yi could still get news of her through Lu Meng and the brothel. She didn't deliberately hide her whereabouts. It's just that the news needed time to be transmitted. Li Yi would always get news of her from a month ago. It was already the 10th month of the 4th year of Jingping. In the past few months, many things had happened. Ruoqing had already taken control of the holy religion and became the one and only Empress of Heaven. In the Qi Kingdom, Zhao Yi officially ascended the throne. After he ascended the throne, he began to clean up the remaining rebel forces within the borders of the Qi Kingdom with a thunderous momentum. In the 9th month of the same year, Yang Liuqing personally led an army of 300,000. They destroyed every city they came across, advancing like a hot knife through butter, heading straight for the imperial capital of the Wu Kingdom. There was another legend in the Jianghu of the Jing Kingdom. There was a chivalrous woman who was highly skilled in martial arts. She was dressed in white and wielded a sword. She punished the strong and eliminated the evil, sweeping away all the injustices in the world. It was unknown how many people who used their power to bully others fell into her hands. She fought the underworld and punished the corrupt officials, gaining the unanimous approval of the common people. The name of the White Fairy was unparalleled among the common people. Li Yi held Li Jin in his arms. Li Duan and Li Mu moved a small stool and sat in front of him, listening to him tell the story of the fairy in white. Li Jin was still young, so she naturally did not understand. But she still lay quietly in Li Yi's arms, blinking her big eyes and looking at him. It was in the nature of a child to play. Soon, he became restless. Yong Ning carried him to find Ruoqing. Li Duan pulled Li Mu to the side. He, who had made great progress in his lightness skill, could not wait to show how he could jump to the top of the wall. Both the brothel and the martial arts world were under her control. Therefore, the news that the famous White Fairy in Jianghu was the current leader of the martial arts world was not widely spread. It was only spread in a small circle. It had always been Rui's dream to be a chivalrous woman. Apart from being the king of mountain bandits, her dream was to overturn the whole Jianghu with one sword. During this period, almost every 2 days, there would be news of her deeds reaching Li Yi's ears. He sat in the yard, looking into the distance. "Husband." Rui walked over and sat beside him. She said, "Go and find Rui." "Husband." Xiaofan had not changed the way she addressed him. She held his arm and whispered, "I miss Second Lady too." Li Yi looked at them and then at Ruoqing and the other two standing beside him. He stood up and said, "Wait for me to come back." In the capital of the Jing Kingdom. In the past few years, the people in the capital had been living happily. If the happiness index of the people in each country was ranked, the people in the capital would be ranked second. No other country could be ranked first. The Wu Kingdom. The Wu Kingdom, needless to say, had been divided a few years ago. Until now, it had not been completely unified. The people were troubled by war. The Qi Kingdom. The Qi Kingdom used to be powerful. But now, the Jing Kingdom had already completed its counterattack. Moreover, the emperor of the Qi Kingdom died a few days ago. The two princes fought for the throne and lost a lot of blood. Many people died. The Qi Kingdom could not be compared with the Jing Kingdom. As for the other small countries around, they did not even need to be compared. The words, "live and work in peace and prosperity," were no longer enough to describe the people in the capital. After their material lives were greatly satisfied, they gradually began to pursue higher spiritual enjoyment. Ordinary dramas and stories could no longer satisfy the needs of the people in the capital. The brothel improved in time and introduced various kinds of activities to attract the attention of the people. Until now, the voice of the capital had been held 3 times in a row. Each time it was a great success. The second Jing Kingdom's talent show had also entered the final stage of preparation and was about to be shown to everyone. As early as a few years ago, the capital had become the largest and most prosperous city in the Jing Kingdom and the surrounding countries. In the past few years, it had been on this road without turning back, leaving the other cities far behind. In the hibiscus garden, Li Xian gave a long stretch. He looked at Li Han beside him and said, "Not bad, you handled these matters very well. However, there are still a few small flaws. You should ask my royal sister for guidance on matters of court politics." Li Han was a little hesitant. He said, "Royal brother, regarding matters of court affairs, royal brother and royal sister can handle them very well. Why do I also need to? Royal brother and royal sister can help you for a while, but can they help you for a lifetime?" Li Xian frowned and said, "A man must be brave enough to take responsibility. Royal brother is doing this for your own good. Do you understand?" "I understand." Li Han could only nod. If he did not nod, royal brother would marry the daughter of the Wang family to him. In this way, Duan Wu would not care about him. He really did not know why royal brother wanted him to do all these things, but he could only pretend to understand. On the other side, a woman who had just finished practicing, took a bath, and changed into a new set of clothes walked into a large hall. When she saw the 2 people in the hall, she immediately walked forward and bowed. "Ning greets Empress Dowager and Mother." A woman touched her head and said, "How many times have I told you? Why is the little girl still so polite?" The woman smiled and said, "Empress, Bing Ning is not little anymore. I am no longer a little girl." "You are not little anymore." The Empress Dowager looked at her and said, "Your 18th birthday has passed so long ago. When your mother was your age, you could already run on the ground." The woman stuck out her tongue. She knew that she had said the wrong thing and immediately shut her mouth. The Empress Dowager looked at her and said, 2 years ago is fine, but your marriage can't be delayed anymore. There are so many young talents in the capital. Is there not a single one that can catch our Bing Ning's eyes?" The woman hugged her arm and said, "I just want to accompany royal sister and mother for a few more years." The Empress Dowager shook her head and said, "You are a princess. Every move you make is being watched. A princess of the royal family who is not married after 18, what will outsiders think?" The woman looked at the other woman with a pleading gaze. Every time this happened, it was the time for her mother to help her out of trouble. However, this time, Imperial concubine Yen did not help her. "The Empress Dowager is right. You are not young anymore. Marriage can't be delayed anymore." She looked at Xiaoning and said, "Since you don't know how to choose, this matter will be decided by mother." She thought for a moment and said again, "It is not so easy to marry a princess of the royal family. Why don't we let His Majesty prepare a competition to find a husband for her? Let's gather all the talents in the world and choose the most virtuous and talented person." The Empress Dowager thought for a moment and nodded. She said, "This is a good idea." Imperial concubine Yen looked at the woman whose face had turned pale and said, "In the vast Jing Kingdom, no one can compare to Jiang of Silla in terms of talent. Ning, why don't you write a letter to that teacher of yours? If he comes back to be the judge, it will be for the best." Chapter 1148. "Mother." Xiaoning's face turned pale. Her mother doted on her the most. When her ladyship urged her to get married, she always stood by her side. But this time, she pulled concubine Yan's hand and shook her head. "Mother, I don't want to get married yet." This time, concubine Yan did not let her have her way. She shook her head. "Ning, you've grown up. You can't just think about yourself. You have to consider the face of the royal family. This matter is decided. Her ladyship and I will go find your brother in a while." Since her mother had spoken like this, there was no turning back. Xiaoning looked at her in disbelief. She bit her lips and ran out of the palace. Inside the palace, the woman beside concubine Yen shook her head. "She will understand our intentions in the future." Concubine Yen, who was already an old concubine, turned to look at the Empress Dowager. "Ning is already 18 years old. According to the marriage laws of the Jing Kingdom, she is at the right age to get married. It won't be too late to delay it for another 2 years. But for Emingzu, I'll have to spend more effort. Speaking of Emingzu, a helpless expression appeared on the woman's face. Sister, it's not like you don't know. With Mingzhu's personality, unless she wants to get married, no one can force her. She sighed and said, to tell you the truth, Ning Wang and Ning Wang have already urged me countless times on this matter. Concubine Yen only smiled. That's true. If Emingzu doesn't want to do something, even His Majesty can't force her. However, I feel that Emingzu already has a plan in mind. We don't have to worry. Even if she already has a plan, she should tell us. I'll talk to her in a few days. The woman shook her head helplessly. This matter needs to be discussed at length. As for Ning Er's matter, I need Xian Er to make arrangements as soon as possible. Hibiscus Garden had become a second palace a few years ago. In reality, other than the morning court and the regular ceremonies, the original palace was no longer of much use. Of course, most of the imperial guards guarding the palace had been transferred to Hibiscus Garden. The imperial guards didn't patrol Hibiscus Garden at a fixed time. From the outside to the inside, the frequency of their patrols varied from day to day. The academy had provided hundreds of algorithms, and each day, a random one would be chosen. In principle, no one would be able to figure out the patrolling pattern of the imperial guards, and naturally, no one would be able to barge in from the outside. A group of imperial guards had just patrolled past one of the palace walls. In less than the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, they returned from another direction. After their figures disappeared for the second time, a small bundle was thrown out from the palace wall. Then, a figure lightly floated over the courtyard wall and landed steadily on the ground. The woman clapped her hands. Just as she was about to look for the bundle she had just thrown over, she discovered that her bundle was being held by a gray-robed old man. The old man held a bundle in his hand as he looked at the woman in tight clothes in front of him and asked, "Your Highness, where are you going?" Xiaoning looked at him and calmly walked to his side. She took the bundle from his hand and said, "I'm going to the academy. Are you going to stop me?" The old man looked at her and asked, "Your Highness, if you want to go to the academy, why don't you go through the main entrance? This is my home. I can go wherever I want. Can't I practice lightness skills?" Shou Ning looked at him for a moment, then began to walk forward. The old man appeared in front of her again. The old man calmly said, "The old princess has ordered that before His Majesty chooses a suitable husband for you, you cannot leave this place." Xiaoning went left, and so did the old man. Xiaoning went right, and so did the old man. Xiaoning looked at him and knew that with her abilities, she was far from being a match for this gray-robed minister. Her face showed a discouraged expression and she threw the bundle back. Watching her climb over the palace wall again, the old man stood in the same place and did not move. Half an hour later, that familiar little bundle was thrown over from within the palace walls again. The old man reached out to catch the bundle and casually threw it back. On the other side of the palace wall, Xiaoning, who had been preparing to climb over again, took the bundle that had flown back. She stomped her feet angrily and left while muttering. When she returned to her palace, Li Xian was already waiting there. Seeing her sit down angrily, Li Xian walked over and said, "It's not easy for me to refuse the Empress Dowager and the old princess's request. Don't blame me. You're all bullying me." Xiaoning glanced at him and said angrily, "I'm going to write a letter to Sir. He won't let you bully me." Li Xian thought for a moment and said, "Then hurry up and write. When you're done, I'll have someone deliver it for you." Xiaoning gritted her teeth and said, "I'll write it now." Qing and Prefecture. Willow Leaf Village. Today's Willow Leaf Village was no longer what it used to be. From the top of the mountain to the foot of the mountain, wide roads were built. The new Willow Leaf Village was several times larger than the original site. There were many shops and innumerable taverns and brothels. It was very prosperous. However, the original site of the village at the back was protected and outsiders were not allowed to enter. And on the back of the mountain, it was a forbidden area that outsiders were not allowed to enter. In the back of the mountain, Li Yi stuck a horsetail whisk into a grave. At this point, he had completed all the requests of the Taoist nun before she died. Lu Qing. Chong stood behind him and looked at the tombstone that had half sunk into the soil. He said, more than 20 years ago, he alone stirred up a storm of blood in the entire martial arts world. If he hadn't died so early, the martial arts world today would be his. His father-in-law had once dominated the martial arts world, but there were not many people who still remembered his name now. Li Yi burned a few incense sticks on the tombstone before he stood up. The two of them walked back to the official road.
A man came forward and said, "Your Highness, the League Master came here half a month ago."
There has been news from the brothels in several states these days. I speculate that the League Master should have gone to the capital. I know. Li Yi nodded.
The man took out a letter from his bosom and said, "This letter was sent from Rui City."
The letter was sent from Rui City, but it was written by Xiaofan. When her letter was sent to Rui City, Li Yi had already left. Rui had someone send this letter over. Li Yi opened the envelope. This letter was very short and the handwriting was a little messy, which meant that she wrote it in a hurry. In the letter, she said that she didn't want to marry yet, but the Empress Dowager and the old princess forced her to choose a husband.
Not only did my brother not help her, but he also added fuel to the fire. "Teacher, quickly come and save me."
These were the last words she wrote. Changde looked at him and said, "Don't forget what you promised Empress Yen." "Don't worry." Li Yi nodded and said, "No one can force her to do something she doesn't want to do." The capital, Morning Dew Hall. Although she also had a palace in Hibiscus Garden, when Emingzu handled state affairs during the day, she was still used to staying in the Morning Dew Hall. Behind her, Xiaofan was lying on a low couch. Her feet were bare and her calves were raised. As she licked the sugar figurines, she swung her legs back and forth. Li Mingzhu read through a memorial, then turned around and looked behind her. The young talents from all over the world have already arrived in the capital, and the selection of the emperor's son-in-law is about to begin. Can you still sit still? Xiaofan flipped to a new page of the Mandarin duck handkerchief in front of her and said, "Of course, what's there to be afraid of? In any case, teacher will come and save me." She swallowed the sugar figurines and looked at Mingzhu. She blinked and asked, "I haven't seen teacher for many years. Sister, do you want to see him?" Mingzhu didn't answer. Xiaofan got off the bed and said, "In any case, I want to go with teacher this time." Mingzhu shook her head and opened another memorial. But in the next moment, she closed the memorial and looked outside the hall. A white-clothed woman walked in from outside the hall. She looked at her and lightly said, "Long time no see." Chapter 1149. After Hibiscus Garden became the political and power center of the capital city, the original role of the Imperial Palace gradually declined. However, the Imperial Palace was still the Imperial Palace. The security was still tight, and it was almost impossible for an outsider to break in quietly. Even if it was a martial arts master. The woman walked in from outside the hall. Mingzhu did not care that someone had broken into the Imperial Palace. She looked at her and did not move her eyes away for a long time. "Sister Rui." Xiaofan jumped off the bed and ran to her barefoot. She grabbed her arm and asked excitedly, "Sister Rui, you are back. Where is Sir? Is he back? Where is he now?" She ran out of the hall barefoot and looked around. She ran back and asked with disappointment, "Sister Rui, where is Sir?" Mississippi Lu looked at her and said softly, "He is not back yet." Xiaofan was a little disappointed. However, she was happy when she thought that Sir would come back sooner or later. She had already seen Sister Rui. Would it be too late to see Sir? Mingzhu stood up and looked at her. She said softly, "Bing Ning, go out for a while. I have something to say to your Sister Rui." Xiaofan nodded. She looked at her royal sister and Sister Rui. She put on her shoes and walked out of the hall. Mingzhu stood in front of Mississippi Lu. After a moment of silence she asked, "Are you here to show off?" Mississippi Lu looked at her. Her face was originally calm, but in the next moment, she showed a charming smile. She nodded and said, "Yes, I am here to show off." The two of them were once strong opponents. In terms of looks, they each had their own merits. In terms of martial arts, they were evenly matched. Li Mingzhu had the advantage in terms of her status as Princess Royal, while Lu Rui's breasts were bigger. If one were to consider it carefully, the two of them were even. But now it was different. She still had an advantage because of her status, but she lost in terms of body size. However, this identity was the only thing she could use to show off. Lu Rui had already become a grandmaster. She had taken that important step before her. How could she not know how to take this step when they were both in the same predicament? This meant that she was not only one step ahead of her on the road of martial arts, but also on the road of life.
This was related to who was older and who was younger, 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 who was younger and who was younger, who could challenge who.
She thought for a moment and asked, "Why didn't he come back with you?" Second young lady Lu did not answer. The atmosphere in the hall fell into silence. Li Mingzhu looked at her and suddenly laughed, saying, "So you haven't won yet?"
When Shou Ning returned to the hall, he looked around and asked in confusion, "Royal sister, where is Sister Rui?"
Li Mingzhu did not continue reading the memorials.
Instead, she walked out of the hall and looked at the clouds in the distant sky.
"Let's go." She left. Xiaoning was even more confused. "But I didn't see her go out just now." Emingzhu did not continue the topic. She looked at her and asked, "The written exam will begin in 3 days. There are thousands of people participating in the first exam. Why don't you go and take a look at the exam questions?" Xiaoning patted her head and said, "I almost forgot. I can't let them do whatever they want. I have to come up with some questions myself." After saying that, she ran away quickly. Emingzhu stood in front of the hall. She looked at the distant sky and the clouds were rolling. A faint smile appeared on her face. It's still not certain who will win or lose. In the Jing Kingdom, the life of the people in the capital city was never boring. This was not only because of the endless new shows and talent shows, but also because they were in the capital city, so there was never a lack of new things around them. The gossip about a third-level official in the imperial court could only be regarded as a spice. It was not even qualified to be a topic of conversation. The love and hatred between Princess Royal and the mysterious Jiang of Silla had been spread among the people in several versions. There were even more versions about the story of His Majesty and Prince Jiang of Silla. In recent months, the Empress Dowager and the old princess were going to choose a husband for Princess Xiaoning. It became a hot topic in the capital city and lasted for several months. Princess Xiaoning was definitely a legend in the capital city. Not to mention the popularity of Xiaoning College in the capital city and even in the whole Jing Kingdom. Her status as the Dean of the Women's College and the President of the Women's Union had made her second only to Princess Royal among the women in the Jing Kingdom. Princess Xiaoning, who was already 18 years old, was still unmarried. This was extremely rare in the royal family. Of course, Princess Royal was already 24 years old and still single. This was not only rare in the royal family, but also among the common people. However, Princess Royal was a special case in the royal family. Even the most reckless censor did not dare to mention this matter. Although the wealthy families in the capital city were not willing to marry the royal princess, Princess Xiaoning was an exception. Not only was she beautiful, but she was also very capable. If they could invite Princess Xiaoning into their family, the family's future would be just around the corner. However, the selection of the emperor's son-in-law in the entire country had completely broken the boundaries of the aristocratic families. Regardless of family background, as long as they were healthy and between 18 and 25 years old, they were qualified to participate in this competition and had the possibility of becoming the prince consort. For most people, this was a chance to reach the sky in a single step. All the men of suitable age in the Jing Kingdom were attracted by this event and traveled thousands of miles to the capital city. In a short period of time, the already bustling capital city was overcrowded with people. All the restaurants and inns were full. Even the villages dozens of miles away from the capital city had temporarily opened their inns. Of course, it was not that easy to become the prince consort. Who was Princess Xiaoning? She was one of the 2 most dazzling pearls among the princesses of the royal family. Those who wanted to marry her could walk around the capital several times, hand in hand. However, there was only one prince consort. These thousands of people had to go through an extremely cruel competition to have the last laugh. First, they had to pass the written examination. The prince consort might not be the most talented person in the world, but he could not be an idiot either. The first round of the written examination involved poetry, history, and even governance. The final ranking was based on the results. It was absolutely fair and open. In this written examination alone, more than 90% of the people would be eliminated. Only 100 people would be left for the second round of the combat examination. Princess Xiaoning was skilled in both literature and martial arts. Naturally, the prince consort could not only be skilled in literature. He had to be skilled in both literature and martial arts.
Only then would he be worthy of the princess. In this combat examination, another 90% of the people would be eliminated.
Only 10 people would be left for the final round. It was said that in this final round, not only would the Empress Dowager and the old consort participate, but even the Emperor and the eldest princess would also be participating. Even if they could not become the prince consort, they would have no regrets in their lives if they could make it this far. The capital city, outside the city gate. A few silhouettes stood outside the gate. They seemed to have traveled a long way and were covered in dust.
The leader was a handsome young man.
He was not old and looked to be in his early 20s. Looking at the tall and majestic city walls, he stood there for a long time. His eyes showed a sense of vicissitudes and depth that did not match his age.
At the city gate, a fat man who had been looking around for a long time suddenly walked up and asked with a smile, "Brother, are you also here to participate in the selection of the prince consort?"
The young man looked away and looked at him.
The fat man sneakily looked left and right, patted his bulging belly, and said in a low voice, "Brother, I have the questions for the first round of the written exam here.
I see that you and I are fated. I'll sell you one for 10 taels of silver. How about it?"
The young man looked at him and smiled. The selection of the prince consort is a national examination.
Where did you get the questions from?
The fat man looked at him and a mysterious expression appeared on his face. He said, "If I am willing to sell it, I naturally have my ways. For 10 taels of silver, you can pass the first written examination. For 10 taels of silver, you can see Princess Xiaoning's beauty." "Brother, are you really not going to consider it?" The young man shook his head.
10 taels?
The fat man saw that he was tempted and quickly said, "Brother, if you are interested, 8 taels is fine."
8 taels?
The fat man gritted his teeth and said, 6 taels, no less."
The young man looked at him and thought for a moment. He said, 10 taels. Chapter 1150.
As Li Yi walked down the street, he casually flipped through the leaked questions scroll that he had spent 5 copper coins to buy. The writing on it was already extremely blurred, and in some places, even the words could not be seen clearly. It was unknown how many editions had been stolen. Let alone 10 taels of silver, Li Yi even felt that the 5 copper coins he had just spent wasn't worth it. Across from him was a young man who was also holding a similar exam paper. After raising his head to glance at him, he put the exam paper into his bosom as if guarding against a thief and quickly walked away. It seemed that taking advantage of the autumn wind of choosing a son-in-law, quite a few unscrupulous pirate merchants in the capital were going to make a fortune. When Li Duan left the capital, he was still young and had forgotten many of his memories. But some things had been engraved in the depths of his memory and could not be forgotten. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Father, can I go find Xiao Rui now?" Li Yi patted his head and said, "Wait for another 2 days, then we'll go home first."
No one knew that they had entered the capital this time.
Neither Li Xian nor the old madam had informed them in advance.
They did not go directly to the Jiang of Silla Manor but to the Li family. In the capital, the rise and fall of a family was extremely short and without any pattern. There was the Chen family from a few years ago, which was a duke and had been high and lofty for decades. But in a single day, it declined and was no longer mentioned by anyone. There were also a few families that had risen in recent years, such as the Lu family and the Zheng family. Originally, they could only be considered second-rate, but in recent years, someone in the family had been promoted and entered the ranks of the imperial court, allowing them to rise to the first rate. Most of them rose and fell, just like the Li family, from prominence to decline, and then back to prominence. Of course, in the entire capital, the number of families that were as prominent as the Li family's current position could be counted on one hand. In front of the Li family's door, a young servant walked up and sized up the strangers in front of him. "Who are you looking for?" These people looked travel-worn. It was obvious that they had been on the road for a long time.
Over the past few years, many people knew that the Li family was prominent, so there were many bad guys who came to meet them.
He had to ask them clearly.
Without waiting for the other party to answer, his butt was kicked, and he knelt on the ground.
"Which king?"
He crawled up from the ground with a furious look on his face. However, when he turned his head, his expression melted like ice and snow. He said with a smile, "Butler Li, why are you? Are you blind?" The old man fiercely kicked his butt and quickly walked forward with an excited look on his face.
"Young master, you're finally back."
Li Yi nodded and smiled. Uncle Li, long time no see. The Li family. Li Duan stood upright in the hall and knelt on the ground. He kowtowed to the two old people several times and said, "Greetings, great-grandmother, greetings, great-grandmother. Duaner, come here quickly. Let great-grandmother have a good look at you." Madame Dowager was already very excited. Without waiting for him to get up, she stood up from the chair, took his hand and looked him up and down. "I haven't seen you for a few years. Duaner has grown so much." The two old ladies had always been healthy, and all their attention was on Li Duan. When he left the capital last time, Li Duan had just learned how to walk. Now, he could easily jump over the wall and tear down the roof tiles. After a long time, Madame Dowager held Li Yi's hand and said, "When Rui came back 2 days ago, I knew that you were probably coming back." Li Yi looked at Madame Dowager and asked, "Where is Rui now?" "She came back to take a look and left." Madame Dowager looked at him and asked, "How long will you stay in the capital this time?" Li Yi smiled and said, "I'm not sure yet. But this time, I plan to bring grandmother with me. Suzhou is not much worse than the capital now." Madame Dowager nodded and said, "Yes, I want to go and see my precious great-granddaughter. She has been in the capital all her life and has long been tired of it." She thought about it and said, "Do you want me to send someone to inform His Majesty and the princess?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't inform them yet. In a few days, I will personally tell them." Li Yi didn't want to make such a big fuss at the moment. Once the news of his return to the capital was announced, who knew how many people in the capital would not be able to sleep? And at this juncture, it was not suitable to announce it. The matter of the prince consort this time had already caused an uproar in the entire capital and even the Jing kingdom. Shaoning could not be married. The former emperor had said that other than herself, no one had the right to decide her affairs. But now that things had come to this, even if the former emperor was brought up, it would still be the royal family that would lose face. He could also directly take Shaoning away and let Li Xian deal with this mess. After all, he was the one who caused the trouble. But this, in the end, was not the best choice. After tricking Li Xian for so many years, it was better to let him go this time. Chong quietly came to his side and asked, "Tomorrow is the day of the written examination. What do you plan to do?" Before the former emperor died, he had given him 3 orders. These 3 orders were for Yongning, Shaoning, and Emingzu. Chong was the supervisor of these 3 orders. "What do I plan to do?" Li Yi thought about it. Robbing and stealing seemed to be out of the question, so he could only rely on his own ability. The Ministry of Rites. The selection of the emperor's son-in-law was supervised by the Ministry of Rites. All the young talents participating in the competition had to first register at the Ministry of Rites. At the yamen of the Ministry of Rites, an official looked at the young man and the old man in front of him. He frowned and said, "Tomorrow is the day of the written examination. The examination papers have already been printed and the venue has already been arranged. Now you are telling me to register? Where have you been?" The young man looked at the official with a smile and said, "Sir, we came from the faraway Shu province. We were delayed on the way and only arrived today. We missed the registration date. It was not easy for us to come here. I hope you can make an exception." "Make an exception?" The official shook his head and said, "Missing the registration date means you are not fated with Her Highness. Go back to where you came from." Li Yi took out a stack of silver notes from his sleeve and secretly handed it over. He said, "Sir, please make an exception." The official glanced at it and estimated it to be a few thousand taels. His heart shook and he was about to reach out his hand when the old man next to the young man grabbed his wrist. The old man looked at him and said in a cold voice, "As an important member of the Ministry of Rites, you dare to accept bribes?" The official's eyelids twitched. He finally realized that these 2 people had come today to make fun of him. His expression darkened. He said, "Which eye of yours saw me accept bribes? You 2 have missed the registration. Hurry up and leave. Otherwise, I will have people kick you out." Chong hooked his arm around the official's neck and pulled him to the side. When they walked out again, the official's forehead was covered in cold sweat. He looked at Li Yi and said in a trembling voice, Young master, please wait a moment. I will immediately arrange for you." Seeing the official's expression, Li Yi knew that Chong was taking advantage of his position to bully people again. He had created the intelligence bureau. Although he had completely let go of it, he still had countless methods to make a lowly official from the Ministry of Rights listen to him. Of course, if it wasn't for the fact that Li Yi was wearing a mask today, his face alone would be enough for him to pass through all the yamens in the capital unimpeded. When he came out of the Ministry of Rights, he had already received the number plate for tomorrow's written exam. This written exam took up almost all the classrooms in the capital. The number plate in Li Yi's hand had already reached more than 100. It could be seen just how many people were participating in this written exam. Chong was not worried about this. Although Jiang of Silla never knew how to be shameless when he boasted, he had to admit that no one could beat him in this kind of competition, whether it was in literature or martial arts. After leaving the yamen of the Ministry of Rights, another few hundred meters was the palace wall. Li Yi stood on the wide street and looked at the familiar palace wall in the distance. He turned his head and said to Chong, "You go back first. Lend me the plate just now." Morning Dew Hall. Emingzu was flipping through the memorials from the Ministry of Rights regarding the selection of the son-in-law. A palace maid came in from outside and said in a low voice, "Your Highness, it's time to eat." Emingzu didn't raise her head and said, "Put it down first." "Yes." The palace maid responded and waved her hand. A few palace maids came in and placed the lunch that had just been sent over on the table. She was used to finishing her work before eating. But this time, when she continued to flip through the memorials, her hands suddenly stopped. She lightly sniffed and looked at the table to the side. On the table, other than the usual dishes, there was also a golden plate of egg-fried rice. She hadn't eaten egg-fried rice in 5 years, but she could never forget this familiar taste. She put down the memorials and walked over. She picked up the spoon and took a small bite. She combed a strand of messy hair in her hair and a smile appeared on her face. Chapter 1151. Li Yi had been away from the capital for 5 years, and the capital had undergone earth-shattering changes. These changes were not only visible on the outside. Some of the landmark buildings were still there, but he was no longer familiar with most of the streets. The new generation had replaced the old in the court. The former Minister of Revenue, Qin Huan, had resigned due to illness 3 years ago, and Zhang Shichen had replaced him. The Ministry of Revenue was busy and could not afford to be distracted. After becoming the Minister of Revenue, Zhang Shichen naturally could not hold the position of the capital governor. The capital governor, Lu Dayo's daughter-in-law of many years, had finally become a mother-in-law. With her keen political sense, she had become the capital governor as she wished. In addition, the Minister of Justice had also resigned due to illness, and the former Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Lu Yi, had temporarily replaced him. This period lasted for 2 years. His second uncle, Li Mingze, did not become the Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, but was transferred to the central government of the 3 provinces. At his age, there was still hope for him to be promoted in his future career. The old generals in the court also resigned one after another in the first year after the former emperor's death. During these 5 years, many young generals had been trained for the Jing Kingdom through the military academy. Li Yi had received this information over the years. What he was looking at now was the tidying up of the intelligence reports over the years. Li Duan walked out from inside and walked to his side. Suddenly, he smelled a familiar fragrance. He sniffed and said, "Dad, I want to eat egg-fried rice." Li Yi put down the things in his hands, stood up, and walked to the kitchen. Li Duan happily followed behind and said, "Dad, can I let Xiao Rui taste your cooking in the future?" The 6-year-old Li Duan could already read. In these 2 years, he and Xiao Rui had exchanged letters. Of course, most of the time, it was him who spoke and Li Yi who wrote. The content of the letters was very childish. It was mostly about how much he had grown and how he could jump from the ground to the top of the wall. He also promised to show it to her when they met in the future. Li Yi took out the steamed rice and casually asked, "Duaner, do you want Xiao Rui to be your wife in the future?" "Of course." Li Duan nodded his head vigorously and said, "We've agreed that when we grow up, I'll marry her so that we can always play together." "If that's the case." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "Then why don't you make your own egg-fried rice for little Rui to eat? If little Rui likes to eat the rice you make, she will often come to find you." Li Duan had a pensive look on his face, as if he was considering it. After thinking for a while, he walked to Li Yi and said, "Dad, teach me how to cook." Li Yi handed him an egg and said, "Crack this egg first. If you want to capture a woman's heart, you must first capture a woman's stomach. This was a principle that Li Yi wanted to teach Li Duan. The men of the Li family could be useless in other things, but they could not know how to cook. After eating his egg-fried rice, Emingzu couldn't eat other people's cooking. She couldn't leave him for the rest of her life. This was the best example. When Li Xian wanted Li Duan and little Rui to be betrothed, he didn't agree. However, the two children grew up together. If they really liked each other, he wouldn't stop them. If Li Xian made similar requests in the future, he could consider agreeing first. After all, Li Xian was very experienced in giving birth to daughters. He had already given birth to 3 daughters in succession. 4th year of Jingping, 5th of November. Today was the first day of Princess Shanning's husband's selection. Li Yi was wearing the mask that Su Zhang had prepared for him. When he walked out of the door, he saw 2 people coming in from outside. The 17-year-old Duan Wu had already become slender and elegant. She was no longer the plain girl he first met. Li Han was also not as fat as before. The genes of the Li Xian family were very good. Among the princes and princesses, none of them were ugly. The 17-year-old Li Han's childishness had long faded. He was a graceful and beautiful young man. However, the beautiful young man looked anxious at the moment. As he chased after the girl in front of him, he explained, "Duan Wu, believe me. I really have nothing to do with that sister of the Wang family. She just treats me as a brother." "She treats you as a brother or something else? What does it have to do with me?" Duan Wu glanced at him and walked into the house. When she saw Li Yi coming out from inside, a happy expression appeared on her face. She hurried over, but stopped halfway. Only then did she remember that the news of her brother's return couldn't be told to anyone. Li Yi rubbed her head and realized that the girl now was no longer the little girl from before. As soon as he let go of his hand, a voice came to his ears. Li Han stood in front of Duan Wu and looked at Li Yi. He said with vigilance, "Who are you?" Duan Wu came out from behind him and said with dissatisfaction, "Li Han, what are you doing?" Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Do you like my sister?" Duan Wu blushed and twisted her hands together. She whispered, "Brother." Li Han was startled and asked, "You are Duan Wu's brother?" Li Yi nodded his head and said, "Although you are Prince Jin, if you want to pursue my sister, you still have to pass through me first." Although Li Han didn't know where Duan Wu's brother came from, at this time, of course, he couldn't be weak. He straightened his chest and asked, "What do you want me to pass?" "I recently encountered a difficult problem in mathematics. As long as you can solve it, I will allow you to pursue my sister." Li Han almost laughed in his heart. It seemed that Duan Wu's brother still didn't know that he was the dean of the mathematics school. In the whole capital, the whole Jing kingdom, and the whole world, who was he afraid of? He was afraid of one person, but that person wasn't in the capital. He wasn't here, so the field of mathematics was his, Li Han's, world. He looked at Li Yi and said with a smile, "What is the problem? Tell me." "It's very simple. You just need to help me prove that any even number greater than 2 can be written as the sum of 2 prime numbers." Li Yi looked at him and said, "I still have some things to do. When this problem is proven, come back here to find me." After Li Yi finished speaking, he turned around and walked out. If he delayed any longer, he would miss the first written exam. There were a lot of people participating in this written exam. Just the exam venue alone, there were more than 100, and it involved more than 10 academies in the capital. Coincidentally, Li Yi's exam venue was Shanning Academy. This was the academy that he had given to Shanning many years ago. He entered the academy, took out his token, found the classroom, and walked in. The exam had not started yet. There were about 40 to 50 people in the exam venue. They were all sitting at their desks, looking straight ahead, quietly waiting for the exam to start. "Brother, do you want the latest version of the secret prediction scroll?" Not long after Li Yi sat down, he suddenly heard a voice. He turned his head and saw a fat man. The fat man saw him and exclaimed, "It's you." Li Yi had a deep impression of this fat man. This was because when he first arrived in the capital, before he even stepped through the city gates, he was sold a set of leaked secret scrolls. The fat man had an even deeper impression of him. The person in front of him was the only one who bought a secret scroll that was worth 10 taels of silver from him for 5 copper coins. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "What, there's a new secret prediction scroll? This fat man was also a talent. He could actually sneak into the exam venue and sell fake exam papers to the examinees. He realized that all the fat men he knew were good at doing business. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Same rules, one price, 5 copper coins." The fat man looked at him and silently walked to the front of an examinee. He asked in a low voice, "Brother, the latest version of the secret prediction scroll is sold cheaply for 10 taels of silver. Do you want it?" That person turned his head to look at him and said in surprise, "There really is a secret prediction scroll? Really?" This fatty clearly had a nimble tongue. He was extremely eloquent, and his tongue was like a lotus flower. After circling around the exam hall, his bulging belly actually reduced a bit. He walked in front of Li Yi again and pulled out a test paper from his belly. He said, "This is the last one. 5 words it is." Li Yi touched the cuffs of his waist and looked at him. He said, "I'm sorry, I didn't bring any money with me." The fat man angrily sat down next to Li Yi and didn't say another word. 5 copper coins was fine, but he actually wanted to take it for free. He had seen black-hearted people, but he had never seen someone as black-hearted as himself. Just as he sat down, an examiner came in from outside. He scanned the crowd and said seriously, "Anything unrelated to the exam, put it all at the front. If it is discovered during the exam, it will be treated as cheating and your right to take the exam will be revoked." Li Yi looked at those people dejectedly put the papers they had just bought on the table. A few more people walked down and carefully checked the papers. The examiner then cleared his throat and announced, "The written exam will now begin." Chapter 1152. All the academies in the capital city heard the bell ringing from the imperial palace. The written exam officially began. Li Yi had already received his exam paper. The questions on the paper covered a wide range of topics, including poetry, classics, governance, and even science. However, the first few questions on the paper made Li Yi smile. Without thinking, he picked up the pen and began to write. However, when the other examinees received the paper and skimmed through it, their hearts immediately sank. They cursed the fat man who had just sold them the paper. Damn it, they had spent dozens of taels of silver on the secret test paper, but none of the questions were correct. What was more hateful was that in order to memorize the questions on the secret test paper, they had already stayed up for several nights. They might as well not have bought it. However, they did not dare to curse for too long in their hearts. After all, the exam only lasted for 4 hours. All the grudges would be settled after the exam. When they were about to answer the questions, they were stunned again. The first question. Ignoring air resistance, if 2 stones, one light and one heavy, fall from the same height, which one will land first? There were 4 options below. A. The heavy one. B. The light one. C. The 2 will land at the same time. D. I don't know. The second question. Wang Xiaoming's father had 3 sons. The eldest son was called Damao, the second son was called Ermao, and what was the third son's name? There were 4 options below as well. A. San Mao. B. 4 Mao. C. 50. D. Wang Xiaoming. The third question was very simple. There was only one sentence. How many plum trees were planted in Hibiscus Garden? The first question was needless to say. 2 stones fell at the same time. This was verified by the emperor himself, so they could not get it wrong. The second question seemed inexplicable, but it was actually a math question. The eldest son was called Damao, the second son was called Ermao, and the third son was definitely called San Mao. As for the third question, how would they know how many plum trees were planted in Hibiscus Garden? The third question was skipped. Fortunately, the following questions were starting to move in a normal direction. Time was limited, so the examinees began to write quickly. Outside the examination room, there were also examiners gathered together to analyze a paper. They were satisfied with the overall quality of the paper, but they were also helpless about the first 3 questions. The first 2 questions were set by the emperor himself, so they did not dare to raise any objections. The question of the 2 stones falling to the ground had already been decided. If anyone still answered incorrectly, they would have to suspect that they were spies sent by other countries. Even if they were not, they would be too ignorant and disrespectful to His Majesty if they did not even know the famous law of free fall. Therefore, anyone who answered incorrectly on the first question would be directly eliminated. As for the second question, they could only interpret it as saying that the person who answered this question incorrectly might have something wrong with his head. And geniuses with brain problems would naturally not be able to marry princesses. Those who answered this question incorrectly would also be directly eliminated. The third question was set by Princess Xiaofan herself. They did not know how many plum trees were in Hibiscus Garden. They did not know how many plum trees there were in Hibiscus Garden. They did not know how many plum trees in Hibiscus Garden. But this question had no. If one answered the first two questions correctly, he would be able to proceed to the combat test directly, no matter how he answered the rest of the questions correctly. If they were and would, they would palace. Academy and would. Emperor would and wooden dynasty. There was an 80% chance that he would eliminate the person who answered the question incorrectly. As for the third question, there was no doubt that it was set by Xiaofan. In her previous letters, she had said that she had given each of the 36 plum trees in Hibiscus Garden a name. She had already been very restrained by not asking these people what the 10th plum tree was called. He spaced out for a while, then continued to answer. Not far from him, the fat man bit the shaft of his pen, lost in thought. He didn't take the exam to marry the princess, but to make money by selling fake exam papers. Therefore, he did not intend to answer. However, if he handed in a blank paper, would he be arrested for disrespecting the princess? He couldn't take this risk, but he also couldn't answer too well. If he passed the written exam, he would definitely be beaten to death by those who had spent a lot of money to buy his exam papers. To be safe, he would only answer the first 3 questions. He picked up his pen and looked at the first question. Ignoring air resistance, if 2 stones, one light and one heavy, fell from the same height, which one would land first? There was no need to choose. It must be the heavy one. However, to be safe, he still intended to choose the wrong one. Choosing the heavy one was right, but choosing the light one seemed to be a bit too stupid. He didn't know if it was a bit too perfunctory, so he just randomly chose the one that landed at the same time. After choosing the C option, he continued to look at the next question. Wang Xiaoming's father had 3 sons. The eldest son was called Damao, the second son was called Ermao, and what was the third son's name? He was a bit suspicious of the intention of the person who came up with the questions. 2 consecutive free marks questions would not be able to pull everyone apart. The eldest son was called Damao, the second son was called Ermao, and the third son was definitely called Sanmao. The one who chose 45 was because he had never studied mathematics. To be safe, he still had to answer this question incorrectly. Well, he would choose Wang Xiaoming. When he saw the third question, he finally frowned. How would he know how many plum trees there were in Hibiscus Garden? When he was about to fill in a random number, he turned to look at the stingy guy beside him and happened to see his answer. 36. He wrote 36 on the bar, then got up, handed in his paper, and left the examination room. If he left late, he was afraid that he would be surrounded outside and beaten to death. In less than the time it took to drink a cup of tea, some people handed in their papers early and left the examination room, causing a commotion in the examination room. Li Yi was not disturbed. Although most of these questions relied on memory and could be solved by cheating, it still took a lot of time to finish all the questions. 2 hours later, the bell rang again, and all the examination rooms in the capital handed in their papers at the same time. Everyone walked out of the examination room, some frowning, and some high-spirited. Hey, I didn't finish. I almost finished it. Who knows how many plum trees there are in Hibiscus Garden? What about the fat guy who sold the papers? He didn't get a single question right. I'll beat him to death. Is there a mistake in the second question? Damao, Ermao, Sanmao, and Wang Xiaoming, shouldn't there be 4 sons? How can it be 3? I pointed out the mistake in the question. Do you think they will give me extra marks? The imperial court placed great importance on the theory examination this time. After the examination ended, the imperial army would immediately transport all the examination papers to the palace. There would be nearly 100 teachers from the academy who would finish grading all the examination papers within a day. According to the rankings, the 100 talents who would enter the Wuxia examination would be selected. In Hibiscus Garden, Shou Ning looked at his imperial mother and said with dissatisfaction, "It's clearly me choosing the emperor's son-in-law, but I can only come up with half a question. Even imperial brother can come up with 2 questions. This is not fair. Concubine Yen looked at her and said. If you didn't ask them what the name of the 10th plum tree in Hibiscus Garden is, you could also give 2 more questions. A eunuch came in with a tray and said respectfully, Concubine Yen, all the papers have been marked. The papers of the top 100 are all here. Concubine Yen took out a paper and frowned. Looking at the blank paper, she asked, What's going on? The eunuch bowed and said, Concubine Yen, although this person only answered 3 questions, he is one of the 2 who answered the first 3 questions correctly. According to the rules, he can enter the Wushu examination directly. Concubine Yen thought for a while and asked, Who is the other person? The other person is the only one who answered all the questions and got full marks. The eunuch said respectfully, He is the first in this written examination. What's his name? Muzi. Muzi. Xiaofan took a deep breath and walked over. She said, Where is his paper? Show it to me. The eunuch handed her the paper at the top. She took the paper but didn't open it immediately. She even looked away. After taking another deep breath, she slowly opened it. After a long time, she closed the paper and put it back gently. She covered her face and pinched it. Suddenly, she looked at Concubine Yen and asked, Mother, have I gained weight recently? Concubine Yen nodded and said, I told you to eat less. Ah! She was shocked. She quickly ran to her room and stood in front of the mirror. She pulled her elastic face and said in distress, I've really gained weight. What should I do? What should I do? After being distressed for a while, a smile appeared on her face again. She threw herself on the bed and rolled around while giggling. As she giggled, she quickly sat up and tidied her clothes and hair. She stood in front of the mirror and smiled like a lady. It was only a day before the written examination. On the high palace wall, there was a huge red list. This was the list of 100 people who passed the written examination and entered the Wushu examination. There were thousands of people who participated in the written examination. In the end, there were only 100 people left. Most people just came to take a look and left with a sigh. Naturally, there were also those who were on the list. They stood under the list with a face full of surprise and didn't want to leave for a long time. This Muzi is a beast. He even got full marks for that kind of paper. It's not just that. I heard that even Prime Minister Shen and a few officials in the court were full of praise for his political analysis. They said that most of the officials in the court can't compare to him. Also, that poem of his has spread like wildfire in the imperial court. Some people even say that his attainments in poetry are on par with King Jing's. Luckily, there's still the Wushu examination. When the time comes, we must unite and get rid of him first. Who is that Pang Er? He's actually ranked 2nd. I've never heard of him before. The capital is really full of hidden talents. Under the imperial list, there was a lot of noise. Some people made it onto the list and laughed wildly. Some people failed, crying and snot. In a corner of the crowd, a fat man looked at the name on the imperial list. His face was ashen and his body was shaking like a sieve. His lips trembled and he couldn't help but mumble, It's shady, shady, shady. Chapter 1153. After the written test, the combat test would be held 7 days later. For 5 consecutive days, Li Yi did not see Li Han even once. According to Duan Wu, Li Han had locked himself in the mathematics school and had not come out for 5 whole days. Prove that any even number greater than 2 can be written as the sum of 2 prime numbers. This question seemed to only have 1 line of words, but it had troubled the mathematics world for nearly 300 years. This was the world's most famous problem, gold box conjecture, codenamed 1 + 1 = 2. Back then, even Euler, who was known as the greatest mathematician on Earth, could not prove it. Then, this problem caused the mathematics world to study for nearly 300 years. Until the day Li Yi went to the library to freeload, no one had proved it. If Li Han really proved this proposition, Li Yi would worship him and offer him at least 3 sticks of incense every day. It was good for a young man to be confident, but he must not be arrogant. Li Han was very smart, but he had a big weakness. If he did not encounter a setback for a long time, he would become arrogant. After 5 years, if he did not wake up, he would become arrogant. He would not know that there was always someone better than him, And each question would be more difficult than the previous one. Duan Wu grabbed his arm and whispered, "Brother, he has been working hard these few days. Don't make it difficult for him." Li Yi nodded and said, Okay. I won't make it difficult for him. Our little Duan Wu also knows how to care about him." Looking at Duan Wu's red face, Li Yi thought that Li Han had grown up these few years. He was no longer the silly little fatty who only knew how to do math. "Aunt Duan Wu, I'm here to play with you." A crisp voice rang in Li Yi's ears. Then, a young girl of about 5 or 6 years old ran in from outside. She looked like she was carved from jade. Li Han followed behind her. His eyes were sunken and he looked exhausted. Li Han looked up and stammered, Little Rui came to play with you. I have to look after her." Li Yi still remembered that when they left the capital, Xiao Rui was just like Li Duan, swaying as she walked. When he looked at the little girl at the door again, he couldn't help but feel a little unreal. In the blink of an eye, she had already grown so big. She said that she was here to play with Duan Wu, but in fact, she only stood at the door for a while before running out. It seemed like Li Han's tricks were deeper than he had imagined. Even such a young child was treated as his wingman. Li Han walked over and pursed his lips. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Then that question I can't prove it. What should I do?" Li Yi shook his head. "I don't know either." Li Han stared at him with widened eyes. You don't know?" He thought that the reason he said he didn't know was to test him, but he didn't expect that he really didn't know. Could it be that he had spent the past few days studying an unsolvable question without sleep or food? In this world, not every question has an answer. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Don't think that there is no problem in the world that you can't solve just because you have studied mathematics for a few years. Mathematics is far from as simple as you think." How familiar were these words? How familiar was this scene? Li Han looked at the person in front of him and suddenly felt his legs turn to jelly. The same tone, the same words. If it wasn't for the fact that he had never seen this distant cousin of Duan Wu before, he would have thought that it was Sir standing in front of him again. He lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, I know. Young master, come down quickly. Young master, be careful. Young master, it's dangerous." A few maids from the Li family stood under the tree and raised their heads. Their faces were full of worry, and even their faces were a little pale from fright. "It's okay, it's not high at all." Li Duan looked down and waved his hand. He threw down the kuju from a branch and said, "Go and play. If you kick the tree again, come and call me." He jumped down from the tree and clapped his hands. When he turned around, he found a little girl standing under the porch looking at him. "Who are you? Why have I never seen you before?" The first to speak was the little girl. She saw Li Duan jump down from such a high tree. She was shocked at first, but when she saw him land steadily, she was surprised and envious. Li Duan looked at her and said strangely, "I have never seen you before either." The little girl looked at him and asked again, "Do you know martial arts?" "Of course." Li Duan was a little proud and said, "My martial arts is very powerful. Even the adults can't beat me." The little girl saw his proud look and curled her lips. She thought that Dwainer was definitely more powerful than him. Dwainer said in the letter last time that he could jump from the ground to the wall. However, she wasn't sure who was more powerful between him and Dwainer. She thought for a moment and said, "My little aunt is very powerful. You definitely can't beat her." Li Duan looked at her and asked, unconvinced, "How powerful is your little aunt?" The little girl thought for a moment and pointed to the roof at the side. She said, "My little aunt can fly to the roof in an instant." Li Duan looked at the high roof and felt a little guilty. He could jump down from the roof, but he couldn't jump up from below. If he bragged now and the little girl asked him to prove it, he would lose face. However, he didn't want to show weakness in front of this little girl. He said, "What's so difficult about that? Xiaonyang, can also fly to the roof in an instant. Then my big aunt can fly to 2 roofs. My little aunt can fly to 3 roofs. My father can fly to 10 roofs, 100 roofs." The little girl thought for a moment. Her father had a pair of big wings and could fly very high. He must be able to reach 100 roofs. It wasn't a lie. 100? Who didn't know how to brag? Anyway, she was the one who started it. Li Duan thought for a moment and said, "My master can fly to the sun." The little girl's expression froze. She couldn't think of anything higher than the sun. Her father said that the sun was a big fireball. She thought for a moment and asked, "Isn't it hot for your master to fly to the sun?" "Stupid." Li Duan looked at her and said proudly, "Can't we fly at night?" The little girl frowned and said, "That's your master, not you." "Then you're not talking about you." Li Duan looked at her and said, "I just need to fly higher than you. Can you fly to the tree?" The little girl ran away angrily. This bad guy bullied her. When would Dwainer come back? When Dwainer came back, he would be able to protect her. Li Duan curled his lips. This little girl liked to boast so much at such a young age. When she grew up, she would definitely be a big talker. Little Rue was the best. Her father said that in 2 days, she could go find little Rue. He hadn't seen little Rue for a long time. He wondered what she looked like now. He ran to his room and confirmed with Li Yi that he would see little Rue in 2 days. Only then did he relax. However, he didn't know if his nose was bad these days. Why did he always smell the smell of egg-fried rice on his father's body? Several days had passed since Princess Xiaoning's written examination to choose her husband. Tomorrow was the day of the martial examination. The location of the martial examination was in Hibiscus Garden. Early the next morning, other than Princess Xiaoning, the Empress Dowager, the old consort, the current emperor, the empress, the noble consort, and the regent, the eldest princess, would all appear. Of course, at that time, the civil and military officials of the court and the nobles of the capital would all enter to observe. This was the largest event in the capital at the end of the 4th year of Jingping. In Hibiscus Garden, Xiaoning looked at the clothes on the bed and said in distress, "What should I wear tomorrow?" Yan Fei stood behind her and gently knocked her on the head. "After they finish competing tomorrow, you will have to personally go on stage. You can't wear any of these clothes." "Ah!" Hearing this, Xiaoning threw herself onto the bed again and muttered, "Then I won't be pretty." What won't you be pretty in?" Yan Fei pinched her face and said, "Go borrow a set of clothes from your sister. You can wear her old training clothes tomorrow." Xiaoning climbed up from the bed and said, "Aya, since I can't win tomorrow, I might as well wear something nice." Morning Dew Palace. In front of Emingzu was a plate of egg-fried rice. The catering bureau hadn't made egg-fried rice in 5 years, but these days, every time it was lunch, a plate would be placed in front of her. A female official walked in from outside and bowed. "Your Highness, everything has been arranged." Emingzu nodded. "I understand." The female official hesitated for a moment and asked, "But Princess, tomorrow with His Majesty and the Empress Dowager, what should we do?" "I have my own arrangements," Emingzu said. She picked up a spoon and began to eat. "Yes." The female official nodded and slowly retreated. Somewhere in the capital, a fatty was carrying a bulging bag. When he sneaked out of his house, he was stopped by a group of imperial guards. This fatty, who had answered the first 3 questions correctly, had been specially instructed by his superiors not to make any mistakes. The imperial guard looked at him and asked, "Young Master Peng, tomorrow is the day of the combat examination. Where are you going?" The fatty's bag fell to the ground and his face instantly turned pale. He hugged the imperial guard's leg and cried, "I deserve to die. I'm not human. I won't sell fake goods anymore. Let me go, let me go." The written examination is just a written examination. Why do we have to compete in martial arts? This is a disgrace to the cultured, simply a disgrace to the cultured. The person beside him nodded in agreement and said, "We are here to bring peace to the world. How can we act like boorish men?" A eunuch walked over and said, "Gentlemen, please enter the arena." Hearing this, the 2 of them silently walked up the stage. It was not easy to stand out from thousands of people. Even if it was a disgrace to them, they would not let go of this opportunity. The rules for the second round of combat examinations were simple. There were no rules. There were 10 arenas, and after the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, the person standing on each of the arenas would be the victor, and would be able to enter the inner sanctum and proceed to the final stage. There were many spectators around the arena. As a eunuch lit the incense and announced the start of the combat examination, the atmosphere on the arena changed immediately. Even the judges at the side of the arena could not believe what they were seeing. They had seen young talents writing beautiful essays in the examination hall, but they had never seen a frail scholar who fought with each other, scratched their faces, and used all sorts of methods to seduce them. Thinking about it carefully, it was not strange for such a scene to occur. It was rare to find someone who was well versed in both literature and martial arts. The first round of the written examination was extremely difficult. Those who remained in this round were mostly talented scholars. There were many who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. It was fine for them to write essays, but it was better for them to compete in martial arts. Of course, the 10 arenas were not all so unsightly. There were 2 arenas where 2 young talents from the capital's aristocratic families were fighting. They had martial arts skills, and the rest of the people on the arenas were quickly cleared out by them. There was another arena where 9 people gathered together, which was a rare sight. They were chasing after a fatty and beating him up. No one knew what was going on. The strangest was probably the first arena. There were only 2 people on the first arena. The 2 of them stood on one side of the arena, motionless. Li Yi only realized that there was only one person left on the other side after clearing out the few people who were rushing towards him. The person wore a hood that covered his face, and it was difficult to see clearly from the outside. The person's body was also covered by a loose robe, and it was difficult to see anything. Other than Li Yi himself, this was another weirdo who did not want to show his true face to others. The other party did not move, and neither did Li Yi. He did not move because the person on the other side was very powerful, very powerful. Li Yi had just taught Li Han yesterday that there would always be someone better than him. He did not expect that in just one day, some things would come true for him. He thought that he had a lot of cheats in his life, and now he could not find a match for anyone below the Grandmaster level. Obviously, he was a frog at the bottom of a well. The person on the other side was obviously not a Grandmaster, but he did not have the confidence to defeat him. Li Yi did not move, and so the person on the other side moved. He was very fast, and there was even a residual shadow in front of Li Yi. Li Yi's figure swayed and disappeared on the spot. At the same time, the person's figure appeared where he was just a moment ago. Li Yi suddenly smelled a familiar fragrance. It was not the fragrance of perfume. It was the fragrance of emingzu. Emingzu. He opened his eyes wide, and because he was so shocked, he even used his original voice. The figure was about to move, but after hearing his voice, it suddenly stopped. Li Yi could feel a pair of shocked eyes looking at him from under the hood. He quickly walked over, but the figure hidden under the hood suddenly took a few steps back, jumped directly off the arena, and soon disappeared from his sight. Li Yi stood alone in the arena, a little confused. What was going on? Emingzu disguised as a man, and fought with him over Shawning? Li Yi himself was shocked, not to mention the audience below. The person in the hood just now actually created a residual shadow. He must be an expert. They were excited, but the opponents suddenly gave up and left the arena. They were surprised and disappointed. Helplessly, they could only look at the last arena that had not been decided yet. On the arena, a young scholar with a swollen face pushed a companion off the arena with difficulty. He looked around, and found that other than him, there was only the fat man lying on the side of the arena. As long as he could drag the fat man off, he would be the winner. He walked to the fat man's side, grabbed his legs and dragged him out with all his might. The fat man did not move an inch. His face turned red, and he used more strength. Rip! The fat man's trousers were torn, and he fell off the arena with a piece of cloth in his hand. At this point, the 10 winners of the Wushu test had all been decided. In a hall somewhere in Hibiscus Garden, Li Xian looked around and said doubtfully, "Strange, where did Emingzu go?" Just as he finished speaking, a figure walked in from outside. Li Xian walked forward and said, "Where did you go?" "The last 10 people have been decided. We should go to the hall." "I was delayed by something." Emingzu tidied up her clothes and said, "Let's go. The Empress Dowager has arrived. The Imperial Concubine has arrived. His Majesty has arrived. The eldest princess has arrived. Princess Shawning has arrived." In the hall, hearing the eunuch's sharp and thin voice, many of the officials and nobles bowed to pay their respects. "Dispense with the formalities." The Empress Dowager looked below and said, "Summon the 10 young talents into the hall." A trace of doubt appeared on Li Xian's face and he muttered, It's already this time, that guy still hasn't appeared. Emingzu looked out of the hall, and then retracted her gaze and did not speak.
Xiaoning sat on her seat, and her body was straight.
She looked out of the hall without blinking, and her hands were tightly holding onto the hem of her dress. Under the lead of a eunuch, 9 people walked into the hall. The reason why there were 9 people was because there was a fat man who was carried in.
Li Xian's gaze swept across the faces of those people, and his face showed disappointment.
Xiaoning's gaze immediately fell on the figure on the far left, and she could not look away.
Chapter 1155.
To be able to pass the theory examination and the first half of the combat examination, you are all outstanding talents of the younger generation in the Jing Kingdom. According to the usual practice, before the final segment, an official from the Ministry of Rites had to give a formal speech.
Li Yi had never seen this official before.
He scanned the crowd and saw many familiar faces, but there were even more new faces. He had been away for 5 years, and many officials had been promoted or demoted. The surrounding officials and nobles glanced at him and then back, but there were 2 gazes that were always on him.
Those were 2 gazes in the same direction.
After being in a high position for so long, Emingzu had a sense of supreme authority.
This kind of authority was not present on the sloppy Li Xian. All the immaturity could no longer be seen on Xiaoning's face. She wore a palace dress and sat beside Emingzu.
She had on light makeup, and her eyes were looking in this direction.
Li Xian tilted his head and looked at Xiaoning and Emingzu.
He asked, "Why are you not anxious at all?
Do you know something?" No one answered him.
The official from the Ministry of Rites had reached the end of his speech. The first half of the combat examination has ended.
For the second half, Princess Xiaoning will test you personally.
What had just happened was only the first half of the combat examination. Only by passing the first half would one have the chance to be tested by Princess Xiaoning.
The princess test was simple. The person who could defeat her would be the emperor's son-in-law.
If no one or more people won, the decision would be made by the Empress Dowager and the princess consort.
Xiaoning walked down from above, holding a sword in one hand. A young man walked into the hall from the crowd.
He held a long knife and bowed to her respectfully. "Your Highness, please excuse me."
Whispers could be heard among the officials. He is a junior from the Zheng family.
No wonder he could pass 2 rounds and stand here.
The Zheng family has a genius in both literature and martial arts. I wonder if he can defeat Princess Xiaoning.
If he can marry Princess Xiaoning, the Zheng family's rise will be imminent. As the officials whispered among themselves, the official from the Ministry of Rites struck the gong, signaling the start of the competition. The young man had already unsheathed his sword the moment the gong rang. Last year, during the military examination, he had lost to Princess Xiaoning, who was disguised as a man, by 3 moves.
In the past year, he had trained hard and his strength had improved greatly. He thought that he had a 50-50 chance of winning.
Clang! He drew his sword very quickly, but Xiaoning was even faster. Halfway through pulling out his saber, a white shadow flashed in front of him. When he came back to his senses, a cold sword was already at his neck.
Seeing this scene, a fatty who had just sat up from the ground took the opportunity to lie back down. Among the 9 of them, several of them couldn't help but shudder and take half a step back. I lost.
The young man tilted his head and looked at the sword on his neck in disbelief.
The officials were also stunned.
From the looks of it, these people who had worked so hard to pass the written examination might not even be able to pass Princess Xiaoning's martial examination. This junior of the Zheng family was already a rare genius in both literature and martial arts. People like him couldn't possibly reach the pinnacle of both. As for him, he was already one of the most outstanding individuals among the 10. Shou Ning withdrew his sword and simply threw it on the ground, saying, "Next." The official from the Ministry of Rites immediately said, "Next, Pang Er."
No one responded.
A eunuch walked over to take a look and said, "Pang Er has fainted." Fainted people naturally couldn't compete with the princess and were treated as forfeiting. The official from the Ministry of Rites crossed off Pang Er's name and said, "Next."
"I forfeit."
A young man said hurriedly, "I am not a match for the princess, I forfeit." Many of the people present shook their heads. It was fine if he was not a match, but if he didn't even have the courage to fight, it would be too cowardly. This time, it wasn't just for Princess Xiaoning's consort. The officials of the court also wanted to see if there was someone with both ability and virtue among these people so that they could guide them in the future. Clearly, this young man's forfeit had disappointed those who had their eyes on him. Up above, the Empress Dowager shook her head when she saw that only 2 people were left after Xiaofan eliminated them. This child should have passed the martial examination first and then the written examination. She and Mingzu have practiced martial arts for so many years. How could these young people be a match for her? Beside her, concubine Yen smiled and said, "That's not necessarily true." Watching those people being eliminated by Princess Shou Ning one after another, the official from the Ministry of Rites stood in the hall with a helpless expression and said, "Next, Mu Zi." Li Yi wasn't the last person. He didn't know how the list of competitors was arranged, but there was still one person behind him. Xiaofan thought about it and walked to the side of the official from the Ministry of Rites. She pointed to the last person and said, "I will compete with him first." The official from the Ministry of Rites was startled. "Your Highness, this. You can't do it, right? If you can't, then I won't compete." All right. The official didn't dare to say no. It wasn't difficult to change the order of the competition. If Her Highness didn't compete now, it would be a huge mistake for the Ministry of Rites. He would definitely be skinned by the minister afterwards. He looked at the name list again and said, "Next, Long Tao." The officials didn't know what Her Highness had said to the official from the Ministry of Rites. They felt it strange that the order of the competition was suddenly changed, but they didn't take it to heart. The last young man was a weak scholar. He looked at Xiaofan and said with a trembling voice, Please show mercy, Your Highness." "I won't hit you." Xiaofan thought about it and said, "Why don't you forfeit?" The young man's expression became solemn. He said, "A man should face difficulties head-on and not retreat. Even if I'm not a match for Your Highness, I will still try." The eyes of the surrounding people brightened slightly. "You have some courage. You know you can't win, but you still do it. Not bad. Even if you lose, you are so much stronger than the previous few." Xiaofan looked at him and nodded. She picked up the long sword that she had put down after the first round and said, "Then make your move. In order to respect you, I won't show mercy." The young man thought of the people who had been eliminated and then looked at the sword she picked up. His heart trembled. In the next moment, a look of determination appeared on his face, and he strode forward to meet them. So what if he failed? Retreating because of fear was more shameful than failure. Thump! He suddenly sprained his ankle and fell to the ground. He held his ankle, cold sweat dripping from his forehead. My ankle is sprained." Contestant number 9 was carried off for treatment because he had accidentally sprained his ankle. When he was carried off, he looked disappointed, as if he would not have retreated if he had not sprained his ankle. At this point, among the 10 people, only Mu Zi was left. Of course, this did not mean that he was the emperor's son-in-law. If he had not passed Princess Xiaoning's test like the previous people, he would have ended up the same as the previous people. The people who had been eliminated could not help but look at him. As long as he lost, they still had a chance. The official from the Ministry of Rites cleared his throat and said, "Next, Mu Zi." Li Yi took a few steps forward and stood in the middle of the hall. He looked at the woman opposite him. Xiaoning was also looking at him. Her expression was a little absent-minded as she stood there in a daze. She just looked at him. After a long time, the official walked to Xiaoning and cleared his throat. He whispered, "Princess, the competition has begun." Xiaoning looked away and nodded. He gripped his long sword and strode into the hall. She suddenly sprained her ankle. Her body swayed and the long sword in her hand fell to the ground. "Sprained my ankle." She steadied herself and limped to Li Yi's side. She raised her head, her eyes filled with tears. "I admit defeat." Chapter 1156. There was a moment of silence in the hall. Then whispers could be heard. Some people even looked at the ground in front of them. They thought that the Ministry of Rites was too careless. How could they be responsible for the venue? If His Majesty, the Empress, or the Empress Dowager were injured, they would not be able to absolve themselves from the blame. Then they were envious of the young man named Mu Zi. He was so lucky. Princess Xiaoning had defeated everyone except him. She had injured her ankle and lost without a fight. He had won so easily that it gave them a serious illusion. It did not look like he was going to marry the princess. Instead, it looked like Princess Xiaofan had overcome all the difficulties and obstacles to marry him. The jealousy of the people who were defeated by Princess Xiaofan could be felt even from a few feet away. Conspiracy. This was a blatant conspiracy. Why did they change the order of the competition when it was Mu Zi's turn? Princess Xiaofan's martial arts were so high, and this was a flat ground. How could she be so careless as to injure her ankle after taking 2 steps? Did they arrange everything before the competition? However, even though they knew there was something fishy going on, they did not dare to bring it up. The conspiracy was the royal family's conspiracy. Whoever dared to expose the royal family's conspiracy was obviously tired of living. Princess Xiaofan, who had sprained her ankle, was helped down by 2 palace maids. At this point, the selection of the emperor's son-in-law had been decided. The Empress Dowager and the Empress Dowager left first, followed by His Majesty and the eldest princess. When the officials finished sending them off and wanted to look for Mu Zi, they found that he had disappeared from the hall. Although the Empress Dowager, and His Majesty had left, the rest of the officials could still continue the banquet in the hall. Everyone gathered in 2s and 3s and whispered to each other. This boy is a rare talent. If we train him carefully, he will become a good husband in a few decades. It's a pity to be the emperor's son-in-law. That's not true. His Majesty has always been unconventional in choosing people. I don't think he will care about this. This is definitely not his style of doing things. Li Xian paced back and forth in the hall as he spoke with absolute certainty. He looked at the eunuch at the side and said, "What about Mu Zi? Let him come and see me." The eunuch respectfully replied, "Replying to your Majesty, the son-in-law has been summoned by Consort Taifei." Li Xian thought for a moment and said, "Then let him come after the old princess finishes asking questions. The one with the surname Mu must have some relationship with Li Yi. He could use the throne as a wager. If he really had nothing to do with Li Yi, he could give the throne to Li Han or Emingzu." In another palace in Hibiscus Garden, concubine Yan looked at Xiaofan, who was being supported by 2 princesses, and looked back from time to time. She said, "All right, we're already here. There's no need to pretend." Xiaofan immediately let go of the palace maid who was supporting her and ran over to ask, "Imperial Mother, how did you know?" Concubine Yan looked at her and said, "Although I am old, I can still see." "How is Imperial Mother old?" Xiaofan hugged her arm and said, "Imperial Mother is not old at all." Concubine Yan shook her head and said, "Even you have grown up and know how to get married. How can I not be old?" Xiaofan suddenly blushed. She looked down at her toes and didn't dare to speak. Concubine Yan stroked her long hair and said, "All right, you go back to your room first. I have something to say to the son-in-law." Speaking of the words son-in-law, Xiaofan's face became even redder. She secretly looked back and then left reluctantly. Li Yi followed Concubine Yan into a palace. Concubine Yan waved her hand and left. She looked back at Li Yi and said, "There are no outsiders here. Sit anywhere, Your Highness Jiang of Silla." Li Yi was startled and then cupped his hands and said, "Consort Taifei's eyes are like torches." He gently took off the mask on his face and sat down in the guest seat. Concubine Yan looked at him and didn't speak. Li Yi knew that she was waiting for his explanation. Before the former emperor died, he gave a secret edict. Li Yi looked at Concubine Yan and said, "Bingning's marriage should be decided by herself. No one can decide for her. This time, the search for the son-in-law is very popular. If the former emperor's edict was used, it would damage the royal family's reputation. So we had to do this." "I know." Concubine Yan looked at him and nodded. She said, "Not only Jiang of Silla has the secret edict, but I also have it." Li Yi looked at her doubtfully and asked, "If that's the case, why did Consort Taifei? If I didn't do this, would Jiang of Silla come back?" Concubine Yan's question was too direct and undisguised. Li Yi opened his mouth but didn't say anything in the end. The former emperor did have such an edict. Concubine Yan looked at him and said slowly, "But that's not the reason why I want you to come back and stand here." Concubine Yan's tone was very calm, but every word made Li Yi's heart tremble. "Bingning is my biological daughter. I only have one daughter. I watched her grow up day by day. I watched her learn to walk, learn to speak, and grow to the age of 18. Girls' hearts are always open to the outside world. It has been like this since ancient times. When they grow up, they can't be kept. She said these words and looked at Li Yi again. She said calmly, she is already 18 years old. From the time she was 14 years old, she was no longer a child. I can treat her as a child, but you can't. You've already abandoned her once.